When I travel with friends, they hate me in the morning. Everyone have fun at the after party last night? Wasn't that cool? For those of you who weren't there, check out our Twitter feed. Not only do we have fun little tiki drinks, we have how we totally took over this bar down the street. It was like all Devopsdays. It was so cool. It was really nice of them to be able to accommodate us. But on a Wednesday night, they were pretty happy about it, too. So it's awesome to see so many of you here in the morning on day 2 and actually here, which is great because we have a fantastic program today as well. It's not like one day is better than the other. It's awesome both days. We're doing a few different things today because our awesome speakers have some awesome ideas. So I'm just curious, in the audience, how many of you speak in some capacity? In your work, at different events, speaking? So we have a few folks. I'd expect more in this audience than others, just because at Devopsdays, we talk to people, right? We try and engage a lot of leadership, and by leadership, I mean people in whatever role it may be, who are interested in driving change and improving what they do and helping others evolve in what they do as well. I mean, really, we don't want to do stuff the same way anymore. That's a big part of what we talk about. We're going to have some opportunities for new speakers later. One of those opportunities is going to be a pre-made deck, and I'm not going to tell the full version. Aaron will tell you all about that later when we do it. But the short story is, we'll make it really easy for you, if you've not been a speaker before, to give it a try. And this is a safe environment. We won't judge you. And it doesn't matter what your experience is or what your background is. Everyone has something of value to share. So think about it. We're going to be asking for volunteers later, and we want you to participate if you've never spoken before. And for people of all sorts, of all levels of experience speaking, we're also going to do this thing as part of the open spaces called Ignite Karaoke. This is Tiffany's fine idea. She's like grinning right now, super excited about it. Anytime someone's that excited about something, it's going to be awesome. So think about participating in Ignite Karaoke as well. The cool thing is, right, you don't have to do anything. It's already prepared for you. All you have to do is show up, and that's really cool. So when we ask for volunteers later, I want to see some hands. I want to see some participation. So you can't have fun if you don't participate. You don't show up to the party never happens. All right, we're going to kick this program off. This is really cool. As I mentioned yesterday, we've been doing more case studies in the program this year because so many of you asked for it. And what's cool is last year, we got to hear about the beginning of KeyBank's journey and introducing DevOps culture and practices to their organization. And really what they were talking about was how they're going to start that journey. And today, we have how that has been applied, or at least begun to be applied in the organization as a whole. And Chris McPhee is actually who talked about it with one of his colleagues last year, too. So it's not some other person making up a different story. It's the evolution of how they've been doing this stuff in their organization right now. Chris is a technology leader at KeyBank who is directly responsible for continuous integration and continuous delivery in the organization. Big hand for Chris.
Thank you. So just real quickly, I want to make sure that I thank that all the event staff here, Warner, Bill, Andy, etc. Why don't we all give them a big round of applause as well? So I know yesterday it was asked, how many is this your first DevOps Days Ohio? Okay, awesome. So we did come up here last year and talk about our journey. So I'll go hit the highlights of what we've been able to accomplish over the last couple of years. Hopefully you've got your buzzword bingo card ready. It's full of the buzzword bingo, and I would be remiss if I didn't have one reference to Conway's Law. So one of my coworkers put it, Conway's Law. Every time you come to a DevOps conference, there's always a mention of Conway's Law. So the presentation is the DevOps abides. It really brings the organization together. I'm hoping that you get the reference to the Big Lebowski there. My name is Chris McPhee. I've been at KeyBank for more than 12 years now. I've held a number of different roles there. I've got a background in system administration, enterprise architecture. So who is KeyBank? We're a bank that's based out of Cleveland, Ohio. We've been growing responsibly since 1825 through acquisition. We've got a footprint in 15 different states, a lot in the upper Northwest, so the Washington State area, Alaska, and then obviously Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York. So one of the things that we started out with back in 2015 is we were having some issues with our online channel. So one of the things that was asked of us to do a deep dive and understand how complex our online banking platform actually is. So we would have outages and we wouldn't know where to look. So they really got a bunch of us together and asked us to do the deep dive. And what we came up with is we're a really complex bank, especially growing through acquisition, a lot of technical debt. This is just a picture, and I'm not sure how great the resolution is, but of all the different infrastructure pieces that are involved in our online banking solution. And then what we did is we actually determined what the transactional flow is of somebody logging into online banking. So last year we put this up here with a bunch of lines. This year we thought we'd show the actual animation. So the animation that I'm going to show here in a few seconds, it really depicts a user coming in to our online banking application. It would be one user coming into one of our data centers, simultaneously another user coming into the other data center. They click login on their login box on online banking, and this is what transpires. Maybe. Maybe not. There it goes. So you see the lines start to fill in. About 180 different transactions through the different pieces of infrastructure later, the user gets their accounts page. Again, I can't really tell how well it translates up on the screen there, but there's a bunch of red lines, there's a bunch of green lines. The red lines is one data center, the green lines is another data center. Those purple lines are actually us going through round robin across both data centers. So we have a highly available environment, and one of the things that we wanted to do is run hot. Well, we actually found out through this exercise that we're not as highly available as we think we are. You'll see a lot of those red lines going down to the other data center and not going back up. You'll see a lot of the green lines going up, and then, like I said, the purple lines where you have the opportunity to go between two data centers. Now that really poses a problem if you're trying to isolate traffic if there is a problem. So in the event, you'll see a lot of lines there, the red lines and the green lines focused in on one area. That's actually a piece of network infrastructure. It's one of our firewalls. So in the event that one of those goes down, we have real issues. One of those actually had gone down. We had real issues. So that really got us into, well, how can we really make this a better experience for our customers? We put some things in place, made some recommendations, got some things implemented. As a part of that, one of the recommendations that we said is, let's really try this DevOps stuff and let's see what happens. So that kind of goes into managing our technical debt. So in our organization, we have really three big stakeholders. We've got our development areas, we got our security and enterprise architecture area, and then we have our operations area. Development's really focused on getting solutions out there for our retail customers, our treasury customers, our corporate real estate, HR and finance. Security, obviously, is their paramount in an age of hacking and when things get broken into, making sure that all the controls are in place, making sure that we're following standards, making sure that we're not vulnerable. And then we have operations, so our operations area around the different infrastructure pieces, so platforms like databases, our operating systems, Unix, Windows, network area, storage. And what we see and what we've seen across a lot of different organizations as we've talked to them is they're really opposing forces, right? So development wants to get things out there as fast as they can for their line of business partners. Security's adding more security all the time. And the operations team is just trying to make sure that nothing goes down and everything stays up. So you really have that opposing forces as a part of talking to all of those groups together. So what we did is we started talking to different organizations. We went out to DevOps Enterprise Summit out in San Francisco, and we read a lot of books. So Phoenix Project, how many people? Phoenix Project, awesome. DevOps Handbook came shortly thereafter. The Continuous Delivery book from Jez Humble and group. How Google does testing was really good. And then because of our relationships with some of our different partners and vendors, we were able to get in contact with thought leaders like John Willis, who was really able to help us come up with a cohesive strategy on what we needed to do in order to kind of jumpstart our process. The other thing that we really took a liking to as we were doing all of our research was Matthew Skelton, who talked about the different patterns of DevOps and anti-patterns of DevOps. So we wanted to put a pattern in place to make sure that we were successful in what we were trying to do. So we really wanted to partner ourselves with our online banking platform. They were going through a re-platform, making a single-page architecture application based on JavaScript, doing RESTful services, and there was really a big push to get a new face of our online banking application out there. So that was scheduled to be delivered in 2017, and then we announced that we were acquiring a bank out of New York, First Niagara. So they were actually going to cancel that entire project because they didn't want our customers to convert to the new platform. They didn't want our First Niagara customers to convert to our online banking platform and then have to convert again to another online banking platform. And that's really when we stepped in and we said, hey, we can help facilitate getting you guys out there faster on budget. So it was actually scheduled to be delivered in 2017, and through the efforts of our team, we actually got them delivered in 2016, which was a great win for us. But how did we do that? We really took a team of 6 individuals. We focused them. We called it the Pilot DevOps team, and we really treated it as DevOps as a service. So that is one of the patterns that Matthew Skelton said could be a way forward in your DevOps transformation. So what we did through the course of about 3 months, we stood up a brand new compute platform leveraging containers and Kubernetes. We put self-service in place so that our development teams could really build their own delivery pipelines and continuous integration pipelines. We assisted them with automated testing. So this is kind of what our SDLC looked like. So across the top, you can kind of see our SDLC steps. And as we got started, we really focused on really 3 key areas to begin with. It was containers, it was automated testing, and it was continuous delivery. So we affectionately say that we cheated as far as delivering infrastructure and delivering compute platforms with containers. Previously, it would take us months to get a server stood up. If you look at our presentation from last year that we did here, my coworker John Rez actually put together something he called Containergeddon. So it was really about, as we were delivering virtual machines, or as we were delivering physical hardware, you first have to rack the servers. You have to install your host VM hypervisor. Then you had to install the guest OS on top of it. Then you had to layer on the different platforms that you were going to install. Then you had to install your different frameworks, your different applications. Then you had to patch it, make sure that everything was up to date, make sure that everything was operationalized, making sure that there were no vulnerabilities. And it ended up being about 3 months later, you would get a server in place that you could finally operationalize and put into production. We were also a very heavily siloed organization, so as you're thinking about, racking a server, that's one team. As you're thinking about installing the hypervisor, that's one team. As you're thinking about, the guest OS, that's another separate team. Onward and so forth. So a couple dozen teams to get a server out the door was normal for us. Containers really solve that for us because you build it once and no longer do you have to keep rebuilding it or repatching it. It's all atomic. You can rip and replace. So that was a great win for us. The other thing that we focused heavily on was automated testing. So we knew that if we wanted to be able to deliver faster, we had to make sure that there were tests in place to ensure quality was up and that it was all automated. So I've got a slide in here in the next couple slides that talks about our automated testing results. We took a very metrics-driven approach. We wanted to make sure that we were making things better, not worse. So on any given build, anytime somebody checked something into source code, it would kick off the build. It would run through the plethora of tests that would include unit tests, that would include some end-to-end regression tests. So every single time somebody committed code, we were running about 7,000 to 8,000 different tests, all in an automated fashion, and in under, I think it was about 15 minutes. I think the average was about 12 or 13 minutes on every single build. So our developers were getting immediate feedback on as they were building their software. And then continuous delivery. So because we were using containers, because we had our continuous integration in place at that point, now we could continuously put the application out somewhere so that we could do the manual smoke testing. We could make sure that things were being done from that perspective, and we were continuously delivering the application in some sort of environment so that we could get value on the testing in the line of business. Finally, and this is still a journey for us, and this is more of the second part of our story, is we started looking at agile practices. And what's kind of humorous, I think, is we were a bunch of infrastructure technology folks, and we were the ones that were pushing agile practices for our development teams. We were a traditional waterfall. So as we were going through our delivery process, we were really trying to get them to get smaller batches, really think about features, and as soon as things were ready, getting it out into production or a production-like environment so that it could be validated. Everybody likes a good tooling slide, and usually this is when we see a bunch of people with cameras taking pictures of the slide, but it really, if you kind of look at the from left to right, the SDLC sort of, you really start talking about design, taking in requirements, taking in features. You really talk about our builds, so using Git and Subversion. We were using some really old source control software previously, so we started to put in new software. We started using artifact repositories instead of just placing it out in the source control repository. And then, like I said, a lot of those tools are really around our automated testing suite. Those yellow boxes are really what my team was focused on and continues to focus on. So continuous integration with Jenkins, continuous delivery. We use a tool from Exebia Labs currently. And then automation from a configuration management perspective. We got Chef, we've got Puppet, we've got Ansible. Those aren't currently on the slide, but and then from a container perspective, Docker and Kubernetes. So this really talks about our test automation, where we were at before and where we're at now. So from a testing perspective, it would take us days to manually test everything. Like I said, we put automated testing in place, and now we were getting 7,000 different automated tests running on every single build. The legacy testing also made kind of the paradigm switch with our offshore testing team. Now they were able to focus more on getting more automated tests out there as opposed to manually testing things. So we were really being more consistent as it pertained to our quality and getting things out the door. Then came our customer day one, which is what we called when we onboarded our first Niagara customers onto our platform. So this was the heaviest time that we've seen from a sign-in perspective. We were getting approximately 30 logins a second or so. There were some issues though with kind of our login flow and how our customers were seeing the login flow. There wasn't actually anything wrong with the technology itself, but kind of the requirements and workflow for the login process wasn't as clear as it could have been. So what we were able to do, because we had all of the automated tests in place, because we had the infrastructure and the automation in place, we were actually able to do 10 production releases in the middle of the day in that first week to help our customers better utilize our platform, which was pretty cool. We'd have somebody in a big team room with all the executives. They'd push the button and they'd just kind of watch it slowly roll through. And then the best piece about all of that, we were making these changes in production, and we didn't cause any outages. There was no negative customer impact as a part of all of that, which was great. So, like I mentioned earlier, we're almost a 200-year-old bank, and this is a great quote that we got from our CIO. DevOps has been a real catalyst for those of us, or for us, and clearly one of those leading edge places that's helping our digital IQ. So what this really spawned is, we were a pilot project focused on one thing. We had 6 individuals focused on one thing. And then we had a reorg that happened in May, and as a part of that reorg, our practices, the things that we were doing really came to the forefront. And that talks about day 2. Day 2 is hard. So as you're scaling the practice, we had 700 plus applications at the bank. Previously, we were working on 1. At any given time, we've got more than 100 different projects in the pipeline that span 3 completely different portfolios that we have. So we have our consumer bank or our community bank, we have our corporate bank, and then we have all of the other enterprise business functions, things like HR, finance, et cetera. So again, we were working on 1 project before, and now there's 100 different projects in the pipeline, and everybody wants to get on board with these practices so that they can get value out to their lines of business and their customers faster. The other thing that we did as a part of the reorg is we really brought, my team is really a team, a smaller team in a group of 3 teams total. We're really focused on a lot of the continuous integration and continuous development, but we also have change management, and we also have our monitoring and alerting teams. So as a part of the reorg, we really sat down and we value streamed out how the work flows through our organization and what that looks like as a part of the reorg. Really able to help try and identify some of the bottlenecks and how we were delivering things going forward, which helped a little bit as well. So in addition to all of that, we started focusing on a lot of the agile practices, getting a lot of our development and delivery teams up to speed on what it means to be agile in our enterprise. So prior to us coming in with our 1 project that we helped started going a little bit faster, it was bringing other teams up to speed kind of on those practices as well. So I think right now, I think we have 4 or 5 different teams now using agile practices as a part of their delivery time, which is amazing. We were also able to get out some innovation in this year as well. We created a chat bot that was able to reset our users' passwords now, which was really a big win for us. We wanted to see, we took a look at all the reports, calls coming into our help desk, and we said, hey, how can we help these guys? And it was really the largest volume of calls that they were getting were password resets. So we helped them put an innovative solution on our Cisco Jabber chat so that we can now reset users' passwords, and they don't have to wait on a phone call all the time to reset passwords now, which was a big win for us too. Really got us out there in the community. But what happens, right? So as we're advancing, as we're using all these new technologies, we still have to deal with everything else within the organization. So there's a lot of complacency, or a lot of, hey, this is my thing. This is what I want to do. This is how I've operated for the number of years. How do we bridge those two together? So there's some built-up animosity there. Now, animosity isn't necessarily a bad thing. There is some good, healthy animosity that helps spark different ways of thinking and how we operate. But how do we kind of bridge that gap, right? So one of the things that we were able to do is bring in some resource expertise. Some of it was through acquisitions. So this year we announced that we acquired a financial wellness startup called Hello Wallet. They're based in DC. That acquisition actually allows us to bring in more products for our customers. It also brought in a wealth of talent now as well that continues to operate in an agile practice. They follow the methodologies, and they've been one of our biggest supporters recently. Over the last 3 years, we've also been able to, we've also seen an uptick in our development hirings. So this is actually a graph here of over the last 3 years in our digital banking space, the number of developers over the last 3 years. So there's really a growth there, and they're starting to get more and more talented resources in those places, really getting the skill set up to upskill everybody else that is already there, which is great. It's a great learning experience for everybody. We've also gone into the community, and there's a number of different technical boot camps or programming boot camps in the Cleveland area, and I know our testing team has done a great job in getting a lot of talent to come in as a part of those programs. And I think at last count, they were up over 20 different hires out of those technical boot camps over the last year. Again, another great win for us. So how do we optimize for speed, and how do we continue to grow what we're trying to do? So the first thing is really cross-functional expertise, making more generalists out of everybody. So one of the things that we did as a part of our reorganization that happened earlier in the year is kind of collapsing the teams a little bit. Teams that had similar capabilities, put them all on the same team so that they can kind of cross-train each other, and it's a real good educational experience there. So things like our OS teams put the Unix team and the Windows team together and cross-pollinate and see kind of the skills grow, putting all the database teams together. This is kind of our first step in what we think the evolution is going to be. It's not going to be the end step, but it is one of the ways that we're trying to get that cross-functional expertise across the organization. We also do a daily 8 a.m. post-mortem meeting that is organized by our chief technology officer. So we go in and we talk transparently, and we give the facts and how to make things better. So if a system does go down, everybody can learn. Everybody can figure out how to do better, do better the next time. It's a really educational experience there as well. And then collaboration and visibility has been a huge thing as well. So visualizing the work that's coming in, making sure that at any given time we're not bottlenecking anywhere in the way that we're delivering the services that we're offering for our different teams. And we started that with our 3 teams in the division that we're in, and now it's going to be expanding over the course of the next year or so that other teams are going to be kind of operating in that manner as well. And then finally, across the bottom, this is my Conway's Law reference. So as the management team was going in to talk about and figure out what the new organization looked like as a part of this reorg that I've been talking about, they really went in and they tried to understand how work flows through the system. We call it Plan Development Run. It's kind of a riff on Plan Build Run, but it's kind of its own thing. So it was really, how do we want work to flow through the system as opposed to here's our organization and here's how the work does flow through. So there was really a lot of thought put into our reorganization and what the structure looks like in technology to make sure that the work is flowing through the system as most efficiently as it can. So that's really where we're at today. Our journey is not over. We're going to continue to grow. We're going to continue to learn from others. I think the story from Nationwide has been great. We follow the Capital One. We follow the Targets, the Starbucks, and we have conversations when we can with those folks. But I would say if you're at a large organization and you want help, there's a number of resources out there that are willing to assist and give you any information as we can. All you have to do is ask. And then lastly, I think the only thing I would say is just do something, right? At the end of the day, you can get all the sign-off or all the leadership buy-in that you want, but at the end of the day, you just got to do something. Even if it's small, start with a minimum viable product, get something out there so that people can riff on it or you can learn what works and what doesn't. So I thank everybody, and there's a few minutes, I think, for questions.
Folks may remember we have a microphone for you to ask questions. Please do so.
So I was really impressed by that graph you had of traffic and able to determine whether you were actually resilient across data centers. What did you generate that with?
That's a great question, and it's actually a funny story. So it started off with an Excel spreadsheet, just a to and a from, and then we put the actual graphic was Visio. Each one of those Visio pieces has an ID, and the guy that I spoke with here last year, John Rez, who's my leader, actually put together a small little program that would just connect the dots.
So how did you populate that spreadsheet in the first place?
So populating the spreadsheet in the first place, we spent about a month and a half interviewing people across the organization in order to come up with what the different components were, and then we just used stencils and put them on. And yeah, so essentially the question was, it was generated doing an audit, not necessarily something watching it, yeah.
Hi, you talked about chatbot to reset password. How did you handle the security? How did you stop someone random trying to fool the chatbot, saying, hey, reset the password for J. Smith or D. Smith?
Yeah, so the chatbot will only reset certain passwords for a user, and it's all internal. The authentication and all of that is, we assume that the person that is chatting the bot is really who they say they are.
Chris, can you share some details about how did you develop the 7,000 automated test cases? Who did it, how you did it, and how long it took?
Can you repeat the first part of the
The
question?
7,000 automated test cases you talked about in your presentation.
The automation around, I'm sorry.
7,000. You mentioned you guys developed 7,000 automated test cases,
Oh, okay,
right?
the 7,000 automated tests.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Who did it, how long it took, and how did you do it?
Yeah, so as a part of our group, when we first spun up, we had a number of different resources. One of the resources that we had was somebody that was really a subject matter expert in the testing space. So they partnered with the delivery and development team in order to make sure that the tests were getting created appropriately. As a part of that, so we currently use JUnit for unit tests, Selenium, and WebDriver in order to drive the end-to-end tests. So as a part of our Maven build process, it does Maven drives the tests in order to do that. So it's really Selenium and JUnit. We're really part of those 7,000 different tests done in collaboration with our quality team and the development team. The question was, do we use anything for service level tests? Not really at this point. We're starting to dive into what it means to profile an application. So, you know, this method or this transaction needs to take this amount of time. We're just now starting to get into some of that detail. So as a part of the reorganization, the monitoring and alerting team, that's one of the things that they're focusing on, is getting a bunch of data so that we can have those exact kinds of conversations. Excellent. Thank you guys again, and thank you to the event staff. It's been a great experience.
Thanks so much, Chris. I always enjoy hearing people's stories and journeys because we all have an opportunity to learn from others and see what they're doing and find ways to apply it in our environment. Our gold sponsors are why we have this party. I'd like to introduce Bob Finner. He's going to be talking about Arista Networks. Please welcome Bob.
Thank you very much. So again, my name is Bob Fenner. I'm with Arista Networks. We do data center switching and routing. How many network folks in the room? Ooh, 3. Great. Well, here's the thing. Here's the issue with the network. If the network doesn't work, nothing else works. And it's always the network people's fault. Remember that, right? But we're seeing a huge convergence now where DevOps folks are getting into all sorts of ways of how do we automate the network, how do we move it to a next generation. And that's where Arista Networks comes into play. So the company was founded on a clean sheet of paper. We wrote a new operating system on top of the Linux kernel. We didn't touch anything or mess with the Linux kernel at all. And we had a lot of these big cloud companies come to us like Facebook, Microsoft, Google, and say, you know, we're really good at automating servers. We're really good with Linux. We're really good with open APIs. But we can't find that in the network world. And that's where Arista Networks was really exploded as an alternative to some things like Cisco or Juniper out there. So we're working with a lot of big enterprises now that are taking the DevOps journey to the network. Again, being open from a clean sheet of paper, you can run things like Ansible, Go, Puppet, Chef, you name it. We have an open SDK, open APIs. We're also seeing a lot of companies go on a journey of how do we bring in things like software-defined networking with things like OpenStack, NSX, Nuage. How do we integrate our network with things like ServiceNow? And that's where Arista can really help. So we got a booth over there if you want to stop by and say hello. Love to talk more about it. A few of our customers are sponsors, and I see a few customers in the room as well, so thank you. And we are giving away a Google Daydream View, which will bring you into virtual reality. So yeah, swing by, drop off a card, and hopefully we can chat some more. So thank you.
Thanks, Bob. One fun part about my job is I get to discover which adapters like to be daisy-chained and which don't. Because in 2017, we're still using VGA for some reason. I'm excited for our next presentation. Aaron came all the way from Chicago to help us learn about technology. Aaron is a caffeine-powered server fox over at DNS Simple, and his presentation is going to be really cool. Please welcome Aaron. Yeah, you're my hero. Remember that VGA adapter story? We're working on it still. I love this slide. It's so cool. All right, go Aaron.
Cool. Hello. Yay, technology. Who loves technology? I love technology. There we go. Let's see here. Let me get my presenter notes. Cool. All right. Technology is hard. I try to make it work every day. And DNS, right? Because it's always DNS. There we go. Sweet. I also love this opening slide. I wasn't sure how well it would translate. Oh, cool. All right, does look cool. I searched high and low for like really cool random images on the internet, and it takes you to some really dark corners of the internet sometimes too, so beware. But yeah, searching for chefs and everything, you find all sorts of weird stuff. Turn on safe search. That's a pro tip. Yeah, so hi everyone. As you introduced me, I'm caffeine-powered server fox. So yes, I do have a foxtail. No one spiked your coffee that I know of. You know, and I am in. This is like the second time I've given a talk in a church. I don't know if that's like a trend or something. Not sure if that's a thing. But I do love this venue, and I really want to thank the organizers for being super welcoming to me. This is my first time in Ohio. Like, I've driven through here, but I've never actually stopped anywhere. So being my first time in Columbus, it's been really cool. I went to like a cool Greasy Spoon diner this morning, got like an awesome steak and eggs, which is kind of my like benchmark of good diners, and it was pretty amazing. So I'm super excited to be here and to talk, and I'm also really excited to see the sketch notes that will be coming out of my talk. I always want to know what the highlights are, what people take away. But as you mentioned, I work for DN Simple. We are a DNS and domain automation management company. So if you ever want to like set up a domain, like purchase a domain, and also just make sure it works on the internet, set up your DNS records, and also secure it with SSL certificates, we are the company you should talk to. We're already built into tools that you might already be using, like Terraform. We were there from day one because we have an open API that we fully support. So if you use Go, Ruby, Elixir, even Python. It's not an official library from us, but we still help support it as much as we can. So if you just want to set up domains and everything, or like build up a mail cluster in, say, Terraform and have it automatically create its MX records, you can do that. It's really easy. So if you want to know more about that, please come talk to me afterwards. All right. Technology again. My keynote thing just died, so let's just go manual here. All right, so to introduce myself for those who don't know me, my name is Aaron Kalin, and yes, I generally have red hair. So as you see there, it's on my driver's license. It's on my passport now too, which makes Border Control freak out a little bit because they look at it and they see light brown hair or dark brown hair. Right, okay. And they freak out a little bit because they see all the red hair. I just love it. You could say it's my favorite color. And my preferred pronouns are he and him if we are going to chat later. And you might also see this if you check out my Twitter feed. My handle is @MartiniSoft. I'm going to put it on every slide. So if you want to tweet about my talk, give me some feedback. I'd love to incorporate that to update everything in my slides and all that. So that way, make sure I have the right information that comes across to everyone. So let's see here. Oh, there we go. Come on, technology. So this talk originated from me kind of getting on a soapbox at ChefConf. I was at a sort of community roundtable thing, and at some point, someone brought up the whole idea of like, so how do we attract and keep talent? Which is like, that's a super basic kind of like pipelining question is what someone might respond with, but how do we bring in new people into our organization, especially if you want to hire in for like operations or QA or something like that? And that kind of set me off a little bit because I've been talking almost for years now about sort of helping increase diversity in technology. Because as a very openly queer boy on stage, like if you look at my Twitter feed and everything like that, if you look at my profile, I'll say that I'm openly, bisexual, queer, furry. Like I've got my, foxtail on, all that stuff on stage. I feel kind of lonely up here sometimes when I'm chatting with all of you. Because even like yesterday, I was actually going to somewhat point out, like, did you notice that it was nothing but a line of dudes proposing talks for the open spaces? Like, I still want to see that change, and so far I'm still not seeing a change in a super meaningful way. It's getting a little bit better, but as even Barbara pointed out yesterday, there's still a lot more work to be done. So I kind of got on the soapbox and this sort of this ranty thing, and that's where this talk came from. Like, how do we actually create that talent? But since I come from more of a restaurant background, so like my entire family, I would technically be a third-generation restaurateur, because back in '66, my family started a bar and restaurant, and there's been, I think, 4 or 5 bars and restaurants in the family in total, so I kind of grew up literally in bars and restaurants. So if I'm unusually comfortable around alcohol, that would be why. Especially last night, I was like giving Rob, I think, all of the different nuances of various gins and things like that, and where they come from and all that stuff. Like, I know, again, know far too much about alcohol and probably food as well. So that's why I've also, with this talk, taken puns to an extreme. It's not so much that I'm going to talk about Chef the Tool, because that also is great because they've also taken puns to an extreme, which makes it really, really hard to Google for if you need help, right? Like all of their tooling, chef, knife. Oh, hi is just that weird one that you, I guess, can find, not really. But so that's why I'm gonna stick with the theme. And today's menu, we're going to talk about DevOps history. I'm going to give you a brief history if you don't know about it. I'm going to draw some parallels to restaurants and the restaurant industry that I think the DevOps community could learn from. And then also I'm going to kind of close out with a lot of questions. So just so you know, at the end of this talk, there won't be a Q&A section. I'm going to actually go right into potentially a new opportunity for a new speaker to come up here and like deliver a talk with me. But if you want to ask questions and all that stuff, that is what Open Spaces is for. If you have like really big burning questions, you're welcome to come ask me. I'm easy to spot. I'm one of the few colored hair folks here. So let's dive right into it. Let's go into some DevOps history. So who knows what DevOps is, or at least when the phrase was first coined, and like knows what the phrase is? Can I see a show of hands? There's like 3 or 4 of you raising. Oh, wow, cool. Interesting. So DevOps, the term, was first coined back in 2008 by Andrew Schaefer and Patrick Dubois. They were, I believe, at Velocity. Might be a little fuzzy in that part of the history. I really should have remembered that one. But so they originally coined this as kind of a way to break down the sort of silos at companies. Like there was the development department, there was the QA department, there were the operations folks. And generally there were walls between all of them. They would throw stuff over the wall, there would be managers kind of keeping an eye on them. But at some point they were like, hey, we should kind of make a party. We should break those walls down, we should bring everyone together, because if we come together, we can not only get more efficiency, better deliverability, we can automate these things, we can really, like, as a group, collaborate. Some people actually take this as a job title, and I think that's okay, personally. Like, if you call yourself a DevOps, that's cool, as long as you're there, personally, I think, as long as you're there to kind of foster that culture in your company. Like, if you are given sort of blessed power by your C-level execs to make sure that managers aren't creating those walls again between teams and all that stuff, if you're there to kind of always Hulk smash those walls and make sure that there's always a party in the middle with all of your different departments, then you can make some really cool stuff happen a lot faster than you traditionally just can't at companies. Even the previous talk talking about how DevOps like increase their pipeline speed and allowed them to deliver their product to customers faster, right? And then, in 2009, so right after they sort of first coined that term in an open space, that's where we started getting the first Devopsdays. So you were all here by way of them. That's where the Devopsdays sort of thing came from. So I'm going to go wind the clock a little bit farther back, because despite my appearance, I'm actually 32 years old. So I remember back in the heady days of the 90s, when we had really crazy like IT departments, because I like to call the 90s sort of the industrial age of technology. It was when all the companies knew, like, we need a technology. We don't really know what we need, but here's money. Just throw money at the problem, it'll be fine. And companies like CDW were all too happy to be like, oh, you got a budget? We've got stuff to sell you, right? We've got entire racks of servers. And back then we had these wonderful people that, if you don't know what BOFH stands for, it means Bastard Operator from Hell. So you had that sort of Milton type character, if you're an Office Space fan, who was always in the corner, and they would know all of your systems. They might be a COBOL programmer, not to slag those folks, but they might be that person that really, really knows your systems in and out. But they're also not really friendly because they deal with lots of stupid things every day, and like people might be badgering them because there's not many answers coming out, so they get really gritty and really unhappy, and so they'll make you suffer for even asking the most basic, even dumb questions, right? And those people in a DevOps world should just not exist. If you are thinking like, oh yeah, there's that guy over in my company that kind of behaves that way, they're sort of like, they make me feel terrible every time I talk to them, you should really not let them exist inside of a sort of DevOps environment. And if you don't have DevOps in your company, you should definitely bring that there. That culture would not allow someone like that to exist, because whether they like it or not, they have to collaborate in order to deliver a good experience to your customers. Same goes for like traditional IT. Like back then, again, you know, with companies like CDW being like, hey, you need a technology, we can sell you a technology. Racks and racks of technology. But companies really didn't know what to do with it. You know, they had traditional IT to like manage your mail servers, your file system servers, all that stuff. And even back then too, this is my most favorite poetic slide. Who relates to this slide? This slide is a little too real for me sometimes. Yeah, pour one out for your homies that know this one too well. But even back then, you know, folks would identify sort of like, I'm an information technologist, or does anyone here identify as like a sysadmin? Yeah, operations, right? Like some will say traditional sysadmin. I mean, today you might call yourself a site reliability engineer. To me, it's a very, very similar job. We all kind of wear roughly the same hats. It's just a newer paradigm that we're shifting into today. So now that I've kind of covered a little bit of the history, just a brief background, let me draw some parallels to restaurants, because at least for me growing up in the restaurant world, restaurants have kind of had DevOps for a while, actually. I want you all to think back to like a really nice experience you had at a restaurant. It could even be like what you would all think is like a fancy restaurant, like one that you pay maybe like $50 a person to go to. There's really nice service, like you walk in, they greet you at the door, they might even know you by name because they already had you booked in the reservation system, all that stuff. You're whisked away to a table and you get like a multi-course meal, stuff like that. And all of that is happening because of basically restaurants' sort of version of DevOps. In that restaurant industry, everyone has these shared responsibilities, because if no one works together, you will notice really quickly, like your food won't come out right, or the wrong order will come out, stuff like that. If these different departments in a restaurant don't operate correctly and together, then you're just going to have a really terrible dining experience, and you're probably going to Yelp about it or tweet about it and say like how terrible that absolutely was, and you'll never go to that restaurant again. So when you walk in, you're greeted by the front of house staff. Usually there's like a maitre d' or something like that. So I'm just going to talk like more of like a super like nice end restaurant, because again they can afford to have this much staff for it. So that's sort of my example here, not like your Greasy Spoon Diner that I was at this morning, because it was basically one person who was doing all of these responsibilities, which totally works if you're a low-maintenance restaurant. But if you're more of like one that deals with hundreds of customers per day, this is something that you really have to scale up to. So the front of house people will be the ones that greet you at the door, make sure you get to your table correctly, or you'll have a maitre d' that then hands you off to your server, and your server will be the one that will be handling your dining experience. The front of house staff can also include, like if you're a super fancy restaurant, you'll have a sommelier, which are the ones that deal with wines and wine pairings and stuff like that. They'll be the ones that suggest like, oh, this meal goes great with this version of wine. You have the back of house staff that coordinate the kitchen cooking staff with the sort of front of house people. They make sure that your dishes come out on time and correctly. Was the thing that you ordered at the right temperature, stuff like that. You also have the cooking staff who actually make the meals. Not just the actual chef, because you might be going to a chef's restaurant and you might know the chef that's running the place, but there's still an army of people that make that chef work. There's a sous chef that's below them. There's the line cooks that prep everything, the prep cooks. Super fancy, you'll have a saucier, the ones who like create sauces just for the chef. It might be tailored to a dish, something like that, or a pâtissier, ones who make the pastries, the delicious stuff that you have at the end of the meal if you're not too stuffed up. And then you have the cleanup crew, because the way you make money at a restaurant is to turn over tables. Like if you can reset a table 3 or 4 times a night, you're making bank, because you'll probably initially make enough money to stay open if you fill those tables once. If you do 2 or 3 times, you can pay your staff. You keep the lights on. You can, weather a storm if, it's like a week-long process where there's just no one coming into your restaurant. If you don't have those staff to actually take away the plates, like the bussers and stuff like that, to bring them back into the kitchen, and you have your kitchen cleaning crew. You have the ones that also clean the pots and pans for the chefs when they're done making a dish. If they don't work all together really, really well, then again, you're gonna end up having a terrible experience, or at least something will be very off. And especially if you're paying a lot of money for a restaurant, you kind of want that to be an impeccable experience. And if even a few things are off, you're gonna be like, that was good, but I probably wouldn't pay that much again for that experience, right? And to become a manager in a restaurant typically means that you have to go through every station. As a manager of a restaurant, if you want to be a really good manager of a restaurant, you need to go through every single station. You need to be a busser, you need to be a maitre d', you need to also be a server at some point. maybe even help the master chef like in the kitchen doing like line work and all that stuff. And while they don't seem like the most glamorous jobs, they're very important, and they're also part of that whole machine that makes that thing work. And then if you want to become more of a, not necessarily a master chef directly, you go to culinary school. You learn about all the basics that create a dish. You learn about how the basics at least work for running a restaurant. So you kind of get like the buffet table of everything you need to know. Like we sort of had this in these developer boot camps type thing. Like you get the buffet table of everything it takes to make a piece of technology. But if you were to just run off and create your own restaurant right out of school, you're most likely going to fail, because they're not going to give you everything you need to know, because experience will still fill in those gaps that they just can't teach you, because they live in more of the academic world, not necessarily the real world. And then becoming a master chef means you're going to work under a great one. A lot of the best chefs in the world have worked under other great chefs. One of the ones in Chicago that I could draw parallels to, he runs Alinea, Grant Achatz, worked at the French Laundry. He just showed up one day as a very, very hungry chef and said, hey, I want to learn how to make the best dishes in the world. And he thought, like, okay, I think I'm okay at my career, but I still have the best dishes ahead of me. And through that, ended up creating what is one of the top 10 restaurants in the world. It's the best one in Chicago, but definitely one of the top 10 in the world by many different standards. So if you want to become a great chef, you have to go seek out one and train under them. Almost like Jedi training academies and stuff like that. To be, a master, you must first be a Padawan, right? That's me being a little nerdy. So, finally to the last part of the talk, creating the next chefs. How do we create that? I want you all to think, because this part I'm going to also seed a lot of hopefully the talks later for open spaces. It's one of my favorite parts about Devopsdays. But who are the master chefs in operations? Can you think of a name? If I ask Matt Stratton in Chicago, he'd say Pete Cheslock. That'd be his instant answer. That's also a trump card. If you ever play DevOps Against Humanity with him and you want a trump card, if you got the Pete Cheslock in your hand, you were going to win. So think about that master craftsman in operations, at least, okay? Are they advancing our craft? Are they creating new operations people? Same for the QA folks in the audience. Do you know anyone who's advancing sort of the craft of quality assurance? Why isn't there? We have this sort of in the development world. There's a lot of those people. Like, let me go back to this diagram again. Because I live over in sort of the left-hand hemisphere here. I oscillate a lot between development and operations. I do development work day to day. I do work on the DN Simple app itself. So if I break the site, I'm really sorry. It might be me. But we have this whole development pipeline thing kind of working because we have lots of dev schools and stuff that are trying to really gap fill here. But what about operations? What about QA? And if you look a little bit farther out into the ops landscape, where I see some next things sort of happening here is, what about the security folks? Why aren't they in this party? There's another wall right there. And if you don't believe security matters, then how about, well, let's see, statistically speaking, half of you have had your personal data exposed recently. How do you feel about that? Do you think that should be a thing at a company? Should that be a thing at your company? And if not, why isn't it? Those people are probably there at your company. Why aren't they part of the entire thing? I know there's the whole notion of DevSecOps, and personally, I still think DevOps can make it work. Yes, it is an unfortunate term in terms of names, but I still think the idea of DevOps is a thing that allows them to be part of this really big party in the middle. And then there's another group, too, that I think needs to be here, too, big data. Right? I say big data because that's the bigger buzzword. It's so if anyone has the buzzword bingo card from earlier, I just checked off a box. So those folks are collecting lots and lots and lots of metrics and telemetry data about not only your apps and how they perform, but how your customers are using your app. They're going to give you information about what really matters in your pipeline. Because you might think that one cool feature is great, but then if no one uses it, why did you even bother in the first place? But if you don't even know that they're not using it, then what does it matter at all? How in the DevOps world could you actually change this if you brought big data into this? If you brought those data scientists, basically, that they call them now, to look at all of the telemetry information that you're collecting. Because companies are collecting terabytes, even petabytes of data. I think Walmart is one of the largest data warehouses in the world. Imagine what you could do with some of that data if you knew more about it and how you can affect supply chains and how much less you can spend because you're not stocking up things that people really don't want to buy, right? And then another question I've got is, why isn't operations work in a curriculum for learning computer science? Like when you go through computer science, they don't really talk about how the thing that you're learning to build works in the real world. Like they might do it as like a few-day exercise, but as far as I can tell, no one in computer science really knows how to like actually operate a server, right? Same I'd ask for QA. Why isn't QA work in that as well? Like, is anyone here that would be a QA person? Did you go to school for it? Probably not. How about operations? Did you go to school for it? Most of you probably got dragged into it of like, hey, can you run the server? And you're like, sure, how do you run a server? Well, you'll find out, right? And sometimes it's just like the deep pool of misery that you get soaked into. In the development world, and I actually can change the slide based on like where I'm at because there's enough developer schools out there where I can kind of flavor this to your locale. I was really happy about the whole We Can Code It thing yesterday. Tech Elevator, I guess, is another one here. Tech Talent South. I just did a Google search for like, so just give me like the local developer schools. Now, I did go through each of their curriculums. None of them actually do anything for operations. None of them do anything for QA. Why not? And if not, if we can't actually teach it, because some people will be like, no, I can't really teach operations. They just have to like feel the pain. I'm like, oh, okay, then that's more like, you know, so like going back to the Jedi reference, it's more like we're all Sith Lords and we're just going to make everyone feel pain and darkness and anger all the time. That's not cool. No. So, and even with these organizations too, like and if that really is a thing, like if we can't teach operations, if we can't teach QA, if that's more of a thing where like in-house you teach the person how you do QA yourself or how you do operations yourself, I guess that's fine. But if you're going to pull them in by way of development, then maybe reach out to these schools to hire the people that are being, you know, sort of created through them. You know, and while they will be very new, very young, very potentially hungry because now they know of this entirely new opportunity that they never knew they had until they go through this school. Like, maybe like that can be a new avenue for us. Would I put a school like maybe ITT Tech here? Or DeVry University when that was a thing, right? Would you trust anyone who would have a degree from them? Silence befalls the room. I think that's my answer. So how do we create more pathways? And again, like I said before, you know, if that's a thing of where we have to bring in and mentor more folks that come from those developer schools, maybe that's the way to do it. I'm not sure. Like I'm gonna, again, seed all these questions to you because we should just have some open spaces to talk about it. Like how do we really bring in those new people? Like actually just curious because I can, you know, maybe some of you are falling asleep. Can I get a show of hands? How many of you are currently hiring? Like you're looking for people right now. That's about, I want to say 30-ish%. Oh, whoa, there we go. I can see up top now. There's a stage light on me. All right, so that's about, I want to say 4 dozen maybe. Okay, how many of you are going to be hiring potentially in the next 6 to 12 months? Like you're not hiring now, but you're probably going to be hiring soon. That's about 4 or 5 more? Okay. So how do you think you're going to be able to get people for those teams? You already have people in the pipeline now? Like raise your hand if you already have people now, like I'm going to hire someone tomorrow. No? All right. So how can we really fix this? One way is, can you create a mentorship or an apprenticeship? Like can your company pay someone, especially a senior level engineer, someone you would call that, to go to like the We Code, Yes We Code and all the We Code camps and all that stuff, to go there and actually mentor a student? Like, wouldn't that be really cool if it basically would sort of be like a really awesome internship with someone who is really experienced in the industry? The senior level person would also get a lot more of an education because they're now learning from basically an entirely new person. They're going to ask questions that they haven't even thought about the answers to in maybe 5, 10 years, you know, if they're that seasoned. So why can't you create those types of things at your company? If you already have this at your company, why am I not hearing about it? Like really, really be vocal about it. Make blog posts. Get up here and speak about it. Because I don't see anything talking about that. I see people talking about let's create a DevOps culture, which is cool. I think as part of your DevOps culture, that should also include apprenticeships and mentorships. And then the other question too, because some ask like, how do we fix the sort of diversity gap? And I'm not talking, and like when I say diversity too, that comes down to many axes. I know like very obviously we're talking about gender, so bringing more women into this space. We're talking about race, bringing more people of color into the space. But there's also folks who have like different skill sets, and I'm also saying like new apprentices. Like, have you ever thought about into operations? I'm not saying you should give them root right off the bat, but what if you can bring someone who has barely touched the command line and learn them, teach them how to do your job in say 6 to 12 months? Do you think you can do it? If not, I'll throw the challenge down for you, and I would love to hear about it next year. Because I would love to see you come up and share that story about how you taught someone who is brand new to tech, who would never have the opportunities that you had, to like become part of your organization and actually help foster that DevOps culture. In fact, if you get them hooked on DevOps culture, I'd almost guarantee that they're going to be like the other loud supporter of you at your company of like, hey, we are going to DevOps. And you're like, what's that? Like, well, let me show you. And then they'll all be about it. And then it's not so much like when I talk about the diversity gap too, like I have up here, why aren't you reaching out to those groups too? Because I hear from others who are like, oh yeah, we posted, a job and everything, and we try to like filter out our candidates the correct way and all that stuff. And then I ask them like, so have you like talked to Girl Develop It, or like in Chicago we have IC Stars, which is more of an urban youth development program. Like they not only teach just developers, they teach like project managers, all that stuff. Like it's a big tech incubator, really cool program. Like, have you reached out to them to be like, hey, we're looking to hire someone, can you send us some candidates? And believe me, they will happily send you a lot of people. I know this, we did this. If you want to know more about it, come talk to me after the talk. So, I think I've ranted enough. I'm gonna get off my soapbox. So hopefully the last part of this talk, I've left you with a lot of takeaways, but also like different questions that you can ask and bring up in open spaces. If none of you do, I will put them up. So that way we can have some more meaningful discussions later today. I would love to thank all of you for the opportunity to speak, and I'm really curious to see what that's gonna look like now, so I'm super excited about it. Again, thank you to the organizers for giving me this opportunity, and thank you all for listening to me. I guess if we have time, we've got a bonus double feature. Let me see here. So again, let me go ahead and close this out. So thank you very much. All right, again, technology. There we go. Wait, yeah, okay. All right, so this one is kind of an opportunity for someone who has never spoken before to come up here and talk with me. So to give you a little background, this is a fun, just dialogue. This is about 2.5 minutes, so it's super fast. It'll be over before you know it. The slide deck is already built, so you just have to read off of the presenter screen. So you'll come over here and hang out with me. I guess we need a second mic for this. So you'll come out and hang out with me. If we don't have a second mic, then we'll get very cozy together. Trust me, I'll ask for permission. And it will be about 2.5 minutes, really quick. Especially if you're a programmer, you'll probably giggle and laugh at a lot of these jokes. There's a lot of puns, inside programmer humor. If you're a manager, I'm really sorry, you might be confused. Operations folks, you'd be like, really? So would anyone like to come up here and join me to deliver this talk? It's kind of a bonus double feature. You haven't spoken before? Come on up. Hi there, what's your name?
Bruce.
Bruce. Everyone, say hi to Bruce. All right, what's your favorite color?
Scarlet.
Scarlet. Okay. What? I love red, come on. Don't, yeah.
Very close.
All right, so blue or green?
Green.
Green? Okay, so whenever you see a green slide come up over here, you're gonna read what's down there. Cool?
Cool.
All right. Is this other mic live? Can we make it live? If not, we're gonna just have to share the mic, I guess. Looking over to the, you good? Is this one live?
Hello.
All right, there we go. You want to use that one?
Sure.
All right. Ready? This is overheard between programmers. What's that query?
Not sure.
A buck for your thoughts?
Think the code hit the skids.
Maybe give it a carrot?
You're not too sharp, are you? Why would you put a hat on it?
What's your angle here?
Look, I just want to mod this code to work.
Me too. I'm amped to deliver this code.
You suggesting we bang out this code?
Yeah, just pound a bunch of keys.
If you do that, I'm going to shriek.
Just brace for the awesome, okay?
What hash are you smoking?
Well, I had a pretzel this morning.
I had the grape strudel my parents made. Has a little squiggle of frosting. Doesn't taste like Octothorpe.
Huh? Want to ship some code?
Sure.
Thank you. Bruce, everyone. All right, now I'm really done. Thanks, folks. I guess we got vendor pitches coming up.
Big hand for Aaron. How fun was that, right? So you're going to be submitting to future CFPs, call for presentations, I hope. Some really good questions. I enjoyed that presentation a great deal. It's not only good to revisit our history in DevOps and remember where the ideas came from, it's also super important that we, as professionals having opportunities in our career, help others grow in their careers as well. I think it's really cool that Aaron called out some of our local organizations. In Columbus, we actually have IC Stars. I was over there last week, and we also, in Tech Elevator, I've spoken to 2 of their classes now about DevOps and information security. These organizations are looking for help. They always want professionals to come and help them, talk about what they're doing, mentor students. And if you don't have things like that in your backyard, find opportunities to give back in other capacities. If you don't have a group, create one. But in most areas, there's a DevOps City group, a DevOps Columbus. We've had a group here before we even started Devopsdays, about a year before the DevOps Columbus group was founded. So many opportunities to give back. It's our responsibility to do so. Now I'd like to welcome our next sponsor, Chef, and Rob's going to be talking to us. I always look forward to Chef because they try and entertain us, and I'm sure Rob's going to do that too. I'm totally putting you on the spot.
Sure. I don't have any jokes prepared, but I'm Rob. I'm the one that Aaron was schooling on gin last night. There are 7 different types. I did not know that. I tried 2 of them. It was good. So Chef, who here has heard of Chef? All right. This might be short. Who here has heard of Habitat? Less noise. Okay, cool. And how about Inspec? Woo, all right, that's the one that's, okay, all right. So we have frameworks. We aim to help you collaborate around building, managing, running your applications and your infrastructure. And then wrapping some compliance around that, automating all of the things so that you can move faster. And you know what? If you have more questions about that, you could just see me at the table, and I'll give you back some time. Cool? All right.
Thanks, Rob. It's always great to work with organizations who give back and support the community. I appreciate what Chef does, so thank you, Rob. Guess what time it is? That's right, time to take a break. We're going to be back here at 40 minutes after the hour. See you there. It helps when you actually turn on the microphone. We're getting started. It'll be amazing if I make it through the day without losing my voice. I was a little worried last night. It's getting a little raw. After we get through DevOps days, I'm probably not going to want to talk to anyone for the rest of the week. I'm just going to curl into a ball and not interact. All right, well, I'm excited to get the program started again. We have Ryan Lockhart, who's going to be talking about business and enterprise agility. He has a story about how we as DevOps practitioners can talk better with folks who are focusing on the business parts of an organization. Ryan came over here from Philly to talk to us. He works as a consultant, a technology consultant with an organization called Contino. Please welcome Ryan.
How's everyone doing? So I have to admit, I'm still adjusting to this whole Ryan is a consultant thing. It's the first year of doing that, so I've always been in the enterprise up till now. So as we get into this, I just want to make sure you guys understand I am impossible to be offended. So if I say something that bothers you, if I say something you like, throw a hand, throw a pen, throw a book, whatever you want to do, just stop me and we'll talk about it. If we go off the slides, we go off the slides. I have a timer, so I'll try to stay as close to that as possible. Like Warner said, I work for Contino. You saw my partner, Adar, speak yesterday, and we're pretty passionate about this stuff. So we're going to go through it in a semblance of a reasonable pace here. The intention of this talk today, we're going to cover a couple different things. I know that most people here are practitioners in the DevOps space, but what I want to do is I want to frame what that means from my perspective. When I talk about DevOps, what does it mean? Because I think everybody kind of has a separate definition. Won't take too long on that because y'all are pretty aware of it already. Then I want to kind of shift and say, when I talk about business agility, what does that actually mean? And why does that matter? Then we're going to talk about a shared syntax. How can we actually communicate with the business partners that are feeding the requirements into the pipelines that we're working with? Talk about an operating model that actually supports both the business agility aspects of the commercial side of the business and the technology piece of how we actually deliver code and applications into production. And then last but not least, I'm going to quickly, if we have time, talk about a quick case study where all of this kind of blended together from the field. So does that look good? Everybody happy so far? Nobody's throwing a thing? Someone's going to take me up on that one day, and I'm actually going to have to duck. All right. So when I talk about DevOps, the first and most important thing for me to say is we tend to, especially from the enterprise stance, it breaks down to people, process, and technology. And with the large enterprise companies that we tend to work with, which of the three do you think they try to solve first? Technology. Yes, technology. Throw money at the problem solves itself. However, when I think about DevOps, that's actually the third leg of the stool. We want to start with the people. We want to understand what the design of the organization is. How do these people interact with each other? What skills do they have? What skills do they not have, right? Let's figure out what the balance of that is. And how do they actually work today? How do they interface? Are we a email-happy company? Do we only talk over phone? Do we only talk over Slack? Co-located, distributed, whatever that is. Next, we want to talk about the process. How do these people actually take one line of code and push it into a production or a production-like state? What are the KPIs that we use to measure the people against and the process itself? And then, just like we talk about, DevOps has about 1 billion different definitions: lean, agile, waterfall, the ITIL, whatever the other processes are that govern the flow of work fall into the process. And then when we talk about technology, that's really the infrastructure, the architecture, the application delivery, the tool set, all of the things that, as DevOps practitioners, we're pretty close to and we're pretty well aware of. But these three things are really what take up the overall landscape of what DevOps culture is. And to actually make sticky change within a large enterprise, you actually have to be aware of all three, and you have to be moving the needle with all three. You cannot do it with technology alone. The way I like to look at DevOps, it's a concierge service for us to deliver value to our users, right? Business agility is the ability for organizations to make pivoting changes in the business strategy and tactics. So when we talk about business agility, it's really the product folk, right? The general managers, the project managers, whoever it is that has the decision-making power in that organization to sense a change in the market or the product and respond to it with prioritization, road mapping, or other decisions to pivot or pursue. There also, business agility really requires the ability to adopt strong configurations and more cost-effective ways of working, right? Hopefully, as I was writing the slide, the idea is, oh wow, this doesn't sound that much different than what we do with DevOps. So the main focus points in business agility really are the organizational design, the market disruption, and the product innovation. Again, super strong parallels into what we do with DevOps, right? Nothing too wildly different here. The problem is we have no shared line of sight into each other, or we struggle with it sometimes, especially in very large organizations, because we have cubicle walls, we have hierarchies within the organizational design. So what we say is, one can actually say that the business agility is the outcome of the organizational intelligence. I look at that and I usually think of, okay, so business agility that speaks to Conway's law, but for the prioritization of product. So for organizations to really adopt a true business agility mindset, there's a couple things that's needed. You can't just go into it with a hope. I mean, the hope as a strategy never works, but it holds true here as well. So really what you need is high fidelity input sensors. Has anyone ever worked with a product team that seems to base their strategy off of what they think or they feel? Damn it, I thought I was alone. All right. So it's really scary sometimes when organizations go through like these Silicon Valley product group type trainings, or they bring in pragmatic marketing, or you actually get a visionary leader that says, we're no longer going to be making our decisions from the tip of the seat of our chair. We're actually going to get out of the building, and we're going to go out there and we're going to start talking to people. And to me, that's literally step one. Going and asking somebody what their problem is or what it is that they want, they're going to give you answers. And you're going to make product-based decisions off of those answers. Problem is, they don't often know what they want. But when you ask them a question, they'll give you something back. And if you use that as your core sense of strategy, you're actually missing quite a bit. So within DevOps, what we do is we tend to build those quick feedback cycles. And we start instrumenting the code. We start putting in analytics and tagging. And we start making smaller incremental releases to the production system that allows for more meaningful feedback loops. We also, for business agility to make sense, you want to do micro bets. No more do we don't want to do those 3, 6, 9, 12-month releases where we put a whole lot of organizational capital into one giant guess. We want to start, putting out things faster and faster so that we get those feedbacks and we get validation of our hypotheses, or we prove the hypothesis to be not true and we make a decision based off that. Oftentimes what you see are organizations that think a hypothesis is something that you prove to be true when it's actually meant to be something that is disproven. Also, stable systems. I mean, I'm not going to go too deep into this. Everybody in the room is probably super aware of how critical that is when you need to make business and strategic-based decisions. And then highly integrated teams, cross-functional teams, the ability to speak to the customer in a domain context that makes sense top-down. So this is really where we kind of come together. So we now have an understanding of what DevOps is. We probably had that walking in the room. I appreciate you guys humoring me as I went through it one more time for y'all. And then when I talk about business agility, what does that mean? Because more and more you're seeing business agility creep up in the conference circle or in the executive rooms. In the conversations I'm in, there's a lot of talk about how can we be more agile as a business, and that's really what that means. So how do we interface the two, right? We have a group of professionals on the technology side that are hyper interested in a lot of the same things that we just talked about on the business side, but there seems to be a disconnect between them in a lot of the organizations that I work with, at least. Actually, let me validate that. Am I alone in this, or do you guys sense there to be a chasm between the technology house and the business side? I mean, hands? All right, cool. So I'm not alone here. So how do we talk to each other then? Our language as DevOps practitioners is different, right? With a lot of the words that we use, a lot of the shared vocabulary is pretty unique. We talk about pipelines, we talk about platforms, we talk about infrastructure, we talk about infrastructure as code, and all of these things that put a layer of mystification. Go with that. Gave me a microphone, it's a word now. We put a layer of mystery around these things, and it's good because we understand what it means when we talk to each other. We don't have to explain that, but as a business person, that can be threatening, and they don't necessarily understand what that means, and it damn sure sounds like we're gonna start shifting the paradigm in which they work. Our intent is very similar between DevOps and business agility, but we don't know how to talk to each other. And oftentimes, I love this, we use Jira as our communication interface, which it shouldn't be. So we need to find better ways of talking to each other, is where this is heading. Stories, story points, and acceptance criteria, definition of done, definition of right, all this other garbage that we put in there just to make it seem like we're creating harmony is always really just creating abstraction layers in the communication standards. So how do we actually build this synergy? How do we actually build syntax? How do we actually build empathy? We start with some domain modeling. How is the system actually supposed to behave, right? Me as a technologist and you as a business person, or me as a business person, you as a technologist, when I say thing X, what does that mean to you? And we actually start understanding then, oh, okay, so I've been developing this system against my understanding, which actually is in discord with your understanding or your intent. One of the best ways I know to draw empathy is using pairing. I'm not saying go grab a business person and have them start writing some tests with you, some unit tests. What I am saying is sit with them and understand how is it that they're coming up with the conclusions that they have. When I deliver something to a testing instance for them to look at, how do they start looking at it? Where do their eyes go? What do they think? What do they feel? What are they hearing, right? Sit with them as they go through some of the customer requests that come through their pipelines, and how do they make those prioritization judgments, and also invite them into some of the engineering practices so they know why we say some of the things we say and some of the things that we do. Most importantly, how many people here would say that they're in an engineering capacity in some form? Okay, just leave your hands up for a second. Bring your hands down if you talk to customers regularly. Okay, so quite a few, about 50% of the hands went down. I appreciate you guys hearing me. I don't really like when people say, you know, raise your hand, lower your hand, raise your hand. So I'm doing it to you. It's just horrible. Keep doing that. I mean, it doesn't really surprise me that folks that are coming to the DevOps days are in a position where they're reaching out to their customer space. But you guys got to realize that's kind of an exception, not the rule. So if you're in an organization where you're not interfacing with the customers much, start with talking, incrementally get closer and closer to that voice of the customer. Doesn't matter how you do it or where you do it. I worked with, before I came into the consulting space, I had a pretty large team that worked with me. I don't like to say worked for me, it's just disgusting. And what I would do is I would have them shadow the support, like the frontline support phone calls, not for long periods of time because it's not super useful, but just drawing empathy from the customer who's trying to log into the system and is getting some problems. What are those problems? Going out on some sales calls, believe it or not, just sending them there not to speak most of the time, but just to listen and hear what the market is saying about what problems they have and how do we do that, or how do we solve for those problems. The idea wasn't to turn these guys into support calls or these girls into sales folks. The intent was really to draw empathy for the users and to then understand more from the business perspective when we make these decisions about where we're going to put some unit tests or the next area of automation that we're looking to leverage, or why have we not yet pulled in compliancy as code. Like when we make these decisions or we make these judgment calls, we have more of a meaningful intent, right? And that intent is super important in our space. So what I want to do is I want to kind of step through an operating model, if you guys humor me, and this is where I'm going to start ducking some books, I hope. But I'm going to talk through how I've seen things work in my past and kind of how Contino, the company I work for now, has codified it. And I'm not presenting this because it's Contino's and I'm up here to sell anything. I'm literally showing you guys this because it works. It's actually been bred out of over 100 engagements that Contino's done, But for the 17 years that I was in the enterprise, this is very similar to how, like the process that I was working towards within my teams. And I hope what you end up seeing is that this actually draws closer the communication lines between the engineering house and the product house, because I'm actually staging a bet here that as much as dev and ops started to blur the line between the two, the more we instrument and put tagging into code, I think you're going to start seeing the blend between technology and product really start to merge in the coming years. So the framework that we're going to go through, everybody says their frameworks are lightweight. This one is hyper lightweight, right? The intent is that it's portable. You can tell I have ADD. I just see something over there. It's hyper portable. It can fit into other larger heavyweight operating models. If you're an ITIL org, this fits into ITIL. If you're a SAFE org, God bless you, this fits into SAFE. All of those things. It's built for scale. So I like to work with large enterprises. The only way that you're going to make an impact in the enterprise is if you prove something and it's scalable. You can take it from one team to many teams, sometimes hundreds or thousands of teams. The next is that it's holistic. And that, from the business agility talk perspective, if you are optimizing a silo, we're going to go lean theory here. If you're optimizing a silo, you're spinning your wheels, right? You need to optimize the whole system. The only way you're going to optimize the whole system doesn't necessarily mean that you're just talking the 3 tiers of the stack, but you also have to put in wrapper services around so that you're interfacing with those business people and you're inviting them into the change movement, because you're fundamentally changing the paradigm in which they work, right? And I mean that because I'm going to keep talking about instrumenting code and bringing metrics back in front of the product team. They're probably not used to that. They're probably used to that office-based decisioning and prioritization. So invite them in as early and often as you can. It's opinionated. It very much speaks to the fact that you have to take an engineering-first approach to the operating model, because that's just where the industry is going. And measurable. Data-driven decisioning is super important, right? You do still have to layer in some of the subjective pieces from empirical learning, but Deming said it best, that which is measured is improved. So when you have a measured framework and model, you can actually start seeing what levers you need to pull, which buttons you need to push, and which ones are being effective. So when you talk about those pivot versus pursuit type decisions, you actually have meaningful numbers to point to, and you can start talking in the language of business. Where is the value? And how can I demonstrate the value? Well, we're releasing faster. What's faster mean? How much value am I getting from faster? So when you actually have something that pulls on those metrics, it's meaningful. Quickly stepping through this, there's 5 main aspects of this model that we're going to see on the next screen here. First of all, we want to nurture it. And it sounds simple, but it's actually difficult. This is when you get people with various different viewpoints coming together to talk about a large effort, right? Oftentimes, it's not even, this is where you get to see the value stream mapping. You pull out the underbelly of the beast, and you start creating that shared understanding of how we're going to change something in the project. You'd have to do some lightweight planning just to size it roughly. I'm not talking about a Gantt chart here. I'm just talking about what are we talking about? What is the strategy? How is this aligned to the strategy? How big's the team and all that good stuff, or how many teams? Proving it is the space that I think a lot of us are familiar with. This is when we take these business objectives and these technology objectives and we try to deliver them in a very lightweight model. We call this a lighthouse project internally, but it's something within the enterprise that we like to deliver in 3 months, right? And if you've ever worked in or with a large enterprise, you can't get business cases approved in 3 months. So delivering something to a production or production-like system in 3 months that's cross-cutting and is changing the ways of working is pretty significant, and I look forward to questions about that later. Usually get something there. It's scalable. Like how do we take this now? Say we prove it in that Lighthouse project. How do we take that and introduce that to the enterprise level scale, right? Multi-office, multi-country, global, whatever it is. How do you take this then and spin it out and across? And we'll talk about that for a little bit. And then we're going to learn a whole bunch when we go through this. And if we did it right, that means we got a lot of things wrong. And how do we take those learnings and apply them back into the cycle, right? So I'm not going to go through all of this, but I do want to kind of build this out so you guys can see how this looks like on a large picture here. And while it is kind of big, it's not overly oppressive. It's damn sure not the scaled agile framework for the enterprise. It's much smaller and lightweight, and you can iterate through this a lot faster. So the first thing is really in that nurture it space, and I'm not going to hit all of these because I don't have the time, but in the nurture it space, this is really where you get that problem alignment. You start building that shared syntax. You start building that shared understanding of what a problem is, and you could build the education piece. And it's not just technology educating the business, it's also the business educating technology about the intent of the application, especially if you don't have a whole lot of analytics and tagging up front. You do have to start from zero, and that's where you start building. When we talk about the planet phase, that's really where you get the business case buy-in. We like to do a maturity assessment just to understand from a cross-cutting perspective, from a cloud and DevOps perspective, where are we starting? And then we go through and prove it out. We talk about the scaling. This is kind of where it gets cool because I think, I'm going to be honest here, fact check me, go for it. We've always been 100% effective in proving it because this is not just the first time we're taking these enterprises through this. As long as we have a executive level sponsor that's helping us shepherd through the bureaucracy of a company, we can prove it in 3 months every single time. If we've engaged stakeholders, if we have that buy-in. So then once we prove it, how do you then scale that proof? How do you build those proof points? And the idea is you take those same time boxes, those 3-month time boxes, because organizations have ADD as much as I do. I'm pretending that's not there. And if you're not proving to them very regularly in 3, 4, 5, sometimes 5-month cycles that there's value in this process, they're going to forget, and they're going to revert to the shared learning, to the learned behavior that they've had for the last 30, 40 years that they've made billions of dollars on top of, right? So you need to continuously prove this in very small, digestible chunks. So you take these teams, this team, and you do a seed and split method. We'll talk about that in a second. Restock that with more engineers that are now buying into this new way of working and this new value delivery stream. You also have to build in support systems. I'm sure you guys have heard of like centers of excellence, DevOps academies before, but this is really where you start giving people and teams models to look towards. And that's not just like code libraries or lunch and learns or town halls. It's actually a way for both the business and the technology teams to come and get a good understanding of what better looks like, right? It's a way to home base. And last but not least is the improve it space. And really, I started working on a new graphic for this because it looks like improve it as the end, but that's actually, this should be a cycle. And we loop back. Once we have an improvement initiative, we go back and we try to nurture that and feed it through the system again. So it's actually a cyclical process. I'm going to stop. Anybody have any questions or concerns so far? It's a good question. So the question was, when I talk about DevOps Academy, is it over a series of weeks? Is it a one-time thing? To me, there's no straight answer. So I am a consultant now. It depends. The idea here is you got to start with something. I mean, some of the organizations that I've worked with get pretty mature, and they actually build in an in-house learning management system that gives like distributed learning. Other times, there's a very large bank that I think has some presence here in this area that has a tech college, and that tech college goes out and does like big learning sessions. So if you're starting a new project that's the first time your group is using Ansible and Packer, for example, they'll come out and do a tailored training for you on the tooling. Or if you have issues in your communication models, they'll bring in people that help with the facilitation, and they'll do a facilitation training. I'll ask the founders. Just give me your email and I'll get it back to. Honestly, no. Part of it is because it creates a beacon of light. Like if you think about the metaphor of a lighthouse, they're usually put up on the coastline or in the low tide areas so that the incoming ships have the ability to adapt where they're coming so that they don't crash. And this is meant to give a beacon of light to the enterprise or to the organization about how can they get to better, right? How can they maintain safety and achieve better outcomes and not crash? So that's a great question. The question was, is the lighthouse usually greenfield or brownfield? Yes. So, I mean, I think you and I actually spoke in the circle yesterday. I go back and forth which I prefer, to be honest with you, which is kind of crazy. I mean, greenfield seems like the better answer, right? Like, oh, you don't have any technical debt, you don't have any learned behaviors that you have to reverse. But brownfield's kind of cool too because you already can start getting some learning from the system. You should have some degree of information, be it ServiceNow, Jira, customer complaint tickets, so you know Oh boy. You know, I almost needed somebody to punch. This isn't my laptop. I'm sensing and adapting. I didn't bring my adapter to the damn thing, so I had to use somebody else's, and I don't have the password. Brownfield's kind of cool because it's already known to be a dumpster fire, and if there's a really good place to look good, it's to put out really big dumpster fires, and it's pretty easy to do that if you have some input into where the fire started, right? Yeah. Exactly. Well, think about it like this, right? If an organization is willing to invest into a brownfield project, that means there's a high degree of business value in that. Greenfield projects, until they've been proven in the market, are a guess, right? All right. I have 6 minutes and 35 seconds. Any other questions? Because we have a couple more slides here. Cool. I'm going to give, hopefully I'll give some time for questions at the end as well. So when we talk about scaling, these are the teams. These are like the Lighthouse project teams that we're talking about. And those icons mean something. I didn't go through all that today, but just assume that means that you have highly available teams that are committed. They have shared understanding, and they have a common target that they're shooting towards. So the idea isn't that you just take that team and then say, oh, that worked, let's get a bunch more. You actually have to go through a meaningful seed and split methodology. But this is like this graphic seems simple. You take one team, you make many. This is really difficult to do because you want to nurture and respect the culture that was built in that first team. And when you scale it, that's when you start losing it. So you have to scale with responsibility, and you have to make sure that there's good oversight and governance, and you have those fundamental like DevOps academies, and you have all of the support services built into your organization that make sure that you don't lose the traction that was gained. All right, so very quickly, I'm going to tell a quick story. It's something that Contino did, but it just actually talks about how this actually applies at scale, okay? So Allianz, it's a very large insurance company. I know that I'm standing in the shadows of a very large insurance company telling this that it's not Allianz, but we haven't done much there yet. So one of the largest, if not the largest in Europe, and they had an internal project team that was scoping out a 2-year project and multi-millions of dollars, and they were trying to break into this new market of small animal, and this one was particularly equine health, so horse health. $300 million market. They wanted to get into it as quickly as possible. So we came in with the exact model I just stepped through. We got the business team talking to the technology team, and we said, we can deliver this in 4 months instead of 2 years. And you know that obviously stirred up the hornets, and everybody said, that's impossible. You're going to cut corners. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. Thank God we got that executive sponsor I talked about. We actually got the CIO of Allianz to say, no, it's, you know, they're talking significantly cheaper dollars. It's worth the bet. We're going to try this. And sure enough, in 4 months, we got them to enter the market. The same stance that they were looking for in 2 years, we got them in there in 4 months. We did that not just by Contino executing the project. We actually did it with Contino working with Allianz engineers at the same time. So there was a dual delivery and upskilling that happened over that period of time. 400% quick. That makes like a really good tagline if you're selling a book, right? I'm not going to read all this. I swear to God I'm not. But the point of it is you can take that model and you can apply it to the largest insurer in Europe, and you can go up against some very senior level objection stance people where they're saying there's no way that's going to work. And 9 times out of 10, when you have people pushing back against your approach or pushing back against your mindset, it's not a technology argument. It's usually going to be a psychology argument because you're threatening safety. So the way that you address that is creating that shared empathy and that shared understanding, shared language, and start talking to those stakeholders in terms they understand. ROI is a very strong term that a lot of business people understand. So learn how your DevOps practices can apply to ROI. How can you get faster release cycles? How can you get your mean recovery time down? How can you get cycle times to improve? And what does that actually mean in a business context, right? All right. So I actually came in under. I thought I was going over. What questions do we have? Any questions at all? Does that mean I have to sing and dance for 2 minutes and 40 seconds, or? You don't want that.
Thanks so much, Ryan. there is a question. Come up to the microphone, please. Go ahead.
You want to take it?
I know you said you're new to the consulting thing, but from what you've perceived, how does your company get called into situations? Is it usually someone up top hears of you? Is it usually someone recommends you from the bottom? Or do you have a sense of the diversity of how you get involved or the buy-in?
That's a multi-pronged answer. I mean, we're very fortunate. We have partnerships. We're as of this week, we're premium partners with AWS. We have partnerships with HashiCorp, with Docker, and with Kubernetes. So when enterprises go to those websites, they usually see our name up there, and they call us there. But truthfully, there's quite a few of us, like Adarsh, my colleague, spoke yesterday, and I'm speaking today. We're pretty much out there in the community doing these types of things, and typically somebody comes up to us after these, they come and talk to us, or they start seeing our white papers, or they start hearing, like the Allianz story was shared in Computer Weekly magazine. The CIO himself wrote the article, and once that gets out there and you start hearing those stories from, from your client, like your clients start telling other clients, that reference point is probably the strongest entry into a conversation like that. Did that answer your question? Cool.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it, man. All right, we have a Slack, a chat for the conference, and a lot of folks are on it, but if you're not on it, to get on it, you can go to our Devopsdays Ohio Twitter account, and it's pinned at the top. And earlier today, a bunch of folks raised their hand when the question was asked if anyone here is hiring. Guess what's on that Slack? There's a job board channel where folks can advertise their positions, or people who are looking for career opportunities can say that you're looking too. So check that out. I encourage you to check out the Slack. Now I'd like to welcome one of our gold sponsors, IBM. They've been a huge help in supporting the conference. Please welcome Mark.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm Mark Boyd with IBM. I'm on our DevOps for the mainframe SWAT team. I'm a technical specialist, so I cover North America, helping mainframe customers implement DevOps. You might say, well, DevOps is DevOps, right? So why a specialist for the mainframe? Well, it has its unique characteristics, okay? So I help do that translation when it comes to the mainframe. Also with me today is Nick, who's an Urban Code developer. Our Urban Code product lab is up in Cleveland, so it was a quick trip for him down to be here today. So if you're interested in Urban Code, and Urban Code is our enterprise deployment solution. So if you want to do a deep dive on Urban Code, I know some of the shops here in Columbus are implementing that. Come and talk to Nick if you're interested in, mainframe kinds of things, DevOps. I'd be happy to talk to you about that. If you're not interested in either one of those, you know that IBM is a big company with a lot of different capabilities that can help customers with DevOps, right? From consulting services to implementation services, cloud, mobile, a whole bag of DevOps, application management, lifecycle tools. So we certainly embrace the open source community. We actually use open source in the development of our products, but there are pieces, right, where open source may not fit. That's especially true on the mainframe. So we have products that fill in, areas that maybe open source doesn't address. But we certainly integrate and embrace the open source community. So I will say this, if you're interested in something you think IBM might have, I know I've worked for IBM for 40 years. I know it's a big company. Maybe sometimes the biggest challenge is just finding the right person to talk to. I mean, I know that. I work for the company. So if you are interested in something specific from IBM besides DevOps on the mainframe or Urban Code, come by and let me know, and I'll make sure that we get you connected with the right person, right? The right specialist to help you with whatever area of interest you might have. Okay? So that's all I have. Thanks for your time. We appreciate being here today. Hope everyone's having a great conference.
Thanks, Bart.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting. IBM is one of the bigger contributors to the Linux kernel, right? A lot of people don't know that. There's a short list of companies who pay people to work full-time on Linux, and IBM is one of them. Now I'd like to welcome Jason Hand. Jason, man, I always enjoy hanging out with Jason. He does so much for the community. He's one of the founding organizers of Devopsdays Rockies, and speaks and helps out people in the community a great deal. So if you haven't talked to Jason and see him around, he's always a great guy to talk to. Jason is going to be talking about postmortems and ways we can improve the way we look at our experiences and our careers and how we can improve from those lessons. And I think that's one of the most important things for an organization that adopts a learning culture. That's one of the things that the best organizations do when it comes to embracing DevOps culture and practices. Jason's a community evangelist. I'm making that up, but he works a lot in his role professionally with the community at VictorOps. Please welcome Jason.
Thanks, Warner. Community evangelist. I've never heard that, but I like it. I'll go with that. As Warner mentioned, we're going to be talking about postmortems, and actually I've got a little bit, some thoughts and feels about just that term too, so let's dive right in. That's me. I'm Jason. I work at a company called VictorOps. They do incident management and on-call management. A lot of you, I know I've already talked to many of you, are customers of ours. I'm not going to say too much about it, but if you have questions, definitely come grab me. That's me on Twitter, at Jason Hand. I've got a few other things, as Warner touched on. I'm one of the core organizers for Devopsdays Rockies. We just had our third one back in April, so we're planning our fourth one for 2018. I have a newsletter that I send out as often as I can called Handpicked DevOps, and if you're interested in that, you just go to the website there and sign up. And then I'm also a host of a podcast called Community Pulse, which is all about building and nurturing and maintaining healthy community within tech, within IT. That could be within your organization or just in general. So that's a little bit about me. Now, one of the things I was able to do this past year is I had great privilege to write a book for O'Reilly, which is an awesome experience. If you ever have an opportunity to do it, I would say go for it because it's opened the doors to a lot of things. And this particular book, it was originally titled Postmortems, but then I started circulating the draft among sort of other leading experts in our industry surrounding post-incident analysis, retrospectives, whatever the term is, root cause analysis, all that kind of stuff. And after getting feedback from all these other experts, we kind of all determined that, you know what, that term postmortem, it's pretty terrible. It's really not a good word to use to describe what it is that we're doing here. So what if we try to just get rid of that term totally? So the title of the book was called Postmortems. I went through and stripped that out, stripped any mention of postmortems out of the entire text with the exception of one little small blurb, which essentially said, the reason why I'm doing this, the reason why we sort of collectively want to move away from this term is that the word postmortem insinuates the search for the cause of death. And while, you know, maybe we want to understand some causal factors, we kind of want to get to the heart of what actually was part of the problem, the point of these exercises is not necessarily to discover the cause, and it's definitely not something that is only going to be done after some tragic or terrible thing that we might sort of associate as death. So anyway, needless to say, this talk is called, or I've titled it Scrutinizing the Scrutiny, but essentially it's, let's take a different angle on these postmortems and see if we can come up with a better way, something that sort of helps us in this new modern DevOps world, moving away from root cause analysis and that kind of thing. Now, in the book, I had J. Paul Reed, who's another expert in this area. I had him write the foreword for me, and this is a little quote from that. Now, what I've got highlighted here, I think, are the two most important aspects of this particular quote. The first one there is that the complex socio-technical systems. I think in a lot of cases, we forget that the system that we're building, or the systems that we're building, include the people. There are people who are actively building, supporting, maintaining, responding to the system itself, and they are part and parcel to the overall greater system. And I think we sometimes forget that. That's a big reason why we go after empathy. It's a big reason why we try to squash blame. It's a big reason why we try to just understand the human elements of incident response, but also retrospectives and how we can go in and improve those. Now, one of the other things that you have highlighted here is the idea of reactions. Now, I think what Paul actually meant here is our responses to those problems, not necessarily our reactions, because, again, I'm a stickler for terms, but reactive kind of insinuates reactionary, chaotic, and that's another idea that has been sort of part and parcel to incident response and going in and understanding from failure is that when something goes wrong, we instantly sort of react to it. In sort of this new DevOps paradigm that we're starting to learn about and understand, we realize that being reactionary, that kind of thing, isn't something we can totally move away from. You have to be responsive, and the idea of being reactive is there. But really something we have to all start thinking about is being more proactive rather than reactive. So that's one of the things that I talk about a lot in the book is how do we sort of understand or reset our understanding of systems and how they fail and what we can do to sort of safeguard ourselves against that, because honestly we can't avoid it, we can't prevent failure, it's always going to be part of complex systems, so it's really better to just sort of prepare and be proactive and carry sort of more of a readiness stance, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So when I say readiness, that can mean a lot of things. But what we're really trying to say here is let's be prepared. Let's just understand, like I said, that failure is going to happen. We need to be able to know about that failure and respond to that failure and recover from that failure as quickly as possible. The teams that have figured this out, they're driving their time to recover down and down. And so we hear a lot of things about how a good metric to see if you're doing this DevOps thing in a better way, continuous improvement, is what does your MTTR tell you? Is that going down and down over time? So anyway, we want to have this idea of readiness. Be more like a pit stop crew where you just know that car is going to come in, it's going to need new tires, it's going to need a top off on fuel, it's going to need you to pull out the fender, and then it needs to get back out on the racetrack. That's sort of the new world. We have to look for ways to optimize for speed. In a lot of cases, when we go into incident response, in particular when we go into learning from those incidents, we don't necessarily optimize for speed. We don't necessarily sort of prepare ourselves to actually get better at dealing with the just sort of inevitability of failure. Now, another sort of problem to this is sort of how we sort of just address our work in general. How many have heard within your offices that this is how we do things around here? This is just the way we get things done. It's a very common and probably one of the most problematic sort of mental ideas that most of us have, along with, I would say, Newtonian thinking of cause and effect. There's some sort of fallacies there in terms of complex systems. But I have in this book, and definitely in all of my talks and the people I interact with, I take a very hard stance that root cause analysis actually does not do us any favors whatsoever in preparing for the future. How many of you you have to do a root cause analysis? It's part of a process, whether it's ITSM, ITIL, or something. It doesn't matter what you're calling it, but there is a process. You have to do these root cause analysis. In my experience, a lot of times those end up feeling just sort of like a checkbox. So just something we have to go do. It's just part of the procedure. But at the end of the day, if we stop and think about it, what we learned from that experience, what we learned from that exercise is quite minimal. We've come up with what we believe to be the root cause. Hopefully we didn't conclude that it was human error, but that often happens, as we saw recently with Equifax. But this idea that there is a root cause is something that we simply have to stop sort of believing in. The systems that we're building are far too complex. There's just a lot of moving pieces. They're constantly evolving, constantly changing, especially as we move further and further into continuous deployment, continuous delivery. There isn't a root cause. And that's something that I think a lot of people believe because they'll do these root cause analysis and they'll come up with multiple root causes, which sounds silly, but that's just something that, sometimes we just kind of let it slide. And so when we start to look at these failures and what's going on, when we slip back into or sort of maintain our old way of doing things, as we've noticed through a lot of the conversations in DevOps, we can't sort of just sit on our own ways, our old processes. We have to continuously look for ways to improve that. And that includes how we go into incident retrospectives as well. And so there's a really great book out there called The Field Guide to Understanding Human Error by this guy named Sidney Dekker, who's, I would say, probably the leading expert in all this type of stuff. And I think he makes an excellent point here that I've tried to include in a lot of my talks, is that cause is not something you find. Cause is actually something you construct in the discussion. You sort of declare or manifest what the cause is. And if you got several of us, let's just say if we took this entire audience and we divided up into small groups, and you set us all out to do a 5-wise root cause analysis, I guarantee there would be a lot of different root causes that all of us would come up with, because all of us have our own bias and our own sort of perception of what took place and what we did and what was going on. And so we're going to go down different paths of discussion, different cognitive paths. And so we end up actually creating the cause in our mind and then sort of making it official as though this is what caused the problem, when that simply isn't the facts. If anything, you've just kind of stopped asking questions. And so we have to reevaluate cause and effect and how we can address cause and effect and sort of learn from that. And there's 3 sort of common models. The first one is the most common one, I think, still today, especially for those who are really rooted in root cause analysis. And that is the sequence of events. This idea that everything kind of works linearly, everything kind of behaves like dominoes. One thing falls and then another thing falls, and yeah, maybe they start to cascade, but there was still that one thing. And it all worked in a sequence of events. That's one model that a lot of companies still sort of embrace. Then there's another model called the epidemiological, a little bit of a mouthful, where we believe that problems in the systems are latent, and that hardware and software, as well as managerial and procedural issues, hide throughout our systems. And again, systems includes people, okay? It has to include people. We have to start reminding ourselves that these are not simple mechanical systems. This is software on hardware, built and operated by people. There are human beings involved in the system. And then the sort of the third model that the DevOps community has widely embraced is what we call the systemic model. And this says that the system itself is a systemic byproduct of people and organizations trying to pursue success with imperfect knowledge under the pressure of other resource constraints, such as scarcity, competition, and time limits. So this is definitely the model that, what we call the unicorns out there have started to sort of accept and embrace and build their framework around, is that failure is just normal. We have to normalize this idea, especially as we get to where we're rapidly deploying new software. It's usually during that deployment, in terms of probability, that's when something goes wrong. But there's also just a lot of things that happen once it gets into production. You have users that go in and do, who knows what. And there's this idea that we just have to believe that there's always going to be failure. And we have to sort of normalize that and prepare for that type of new world. And so that leads us into post-incident review. And I say, at the bottom there, i.e. post-mortem, because that's a term. I'm not going to try to get on anyone's case and say you shouldn't use it, but actually you probably shouldn't use it. But it doesn't matter what you call it. I really have no qualms about what the term is that you use. It's more about what your approach is and what you're doing when you go into these. So I thought what we'd do with the remainder of our time here is actually go through a fictional story. This is based on a case study that's inside the book, where we can sort of see an example and of some sort of brief outage, some sort of service disruption that somebody had to go through, a team had to kind of deal with. And I want you to start kind of realizing that there is a story here, and that those stories require sort of input from different places and different people and the folks that were involved with, whether this is building software or responding to software or whatever the case is, there's a story that has to be told. And it's in this story that we actually start to learn things. We start to include the human element. We start to include why people were doing what they did, what made them think that that was the right thing to do in that moment. And those are the types of things that do not show up in your traditional root cause analysis. Those focus more on technical problems. But we have to start including the human pieces. That's actually where the real learning starts to evolve. That's how we start to understand more about the system. There's no way any one person in your organization knows the system in its entirety. We never will. But we want to keep inching closer and closer to some sense of certainty about how things behave. We have to develop these mental models in our mind about how the system works and in different ways under certain circumstances. And so you have to constantly learn. That's why there's this big push about continuous improvement, continuous learning, because that's really our only hope here, is to continually try to understand more of the system as it's constantly changing. So we're going to look at an outage here, 38-minute outage from a company called Acme Dash. By the way, if you go to acmedash.com, that's where you can find all the slides for this. So what we want to do is create a timeline event. Now, I have this slide here because I want to point out something. There's a term that gets used a lot, especially in accident investigations, especially in some sort of retro, about what happened. Who do we hold accountable? We have to have somebody who's accountable for this stuff. Usually, when someone says that, in that tone, in that inflection, in that context, they mean responsible. They want to hold someone responsible for the problem. They want one neck to wring. They want someone to fire. They want heads to roll. Accountability, in its true sense, in the sense that we talk about in DevOps, is that we want people to give an accurate account of what happened. That's it. We want them to feel safe saying, this is what I saw, this is what I felt, this is what I thought I should do, this is what other people were telling me. We want all of that information because that exposes areas of the systems that we didn't realize were there. That takes us to the latent parts of the problem that we just didn't know existed. And maybe that's the idea that there's a procedure that someone does under certain circumstances that I, as a CTO, had no idea that's what they were doing. I didn't know that was part of their troubleshooting task. I didn't know that that's what they thought that they should do under that circumstance. They kept that to themselves. They didn't discuss that because we were doing stupid root cause analysis, which only focused on the technical bits. So we want accountability, but I want it in its truest sense. No one is ever responsible for a problem. Even the Equifax guy, he was not responsible for that problem. So let's look at a story. We're going to start at 4:03 p.m., and we've got our buddy Gary here. Can you guys read that? Yeah. So Gary is a member of our support team, and he just casually happens to check Twitter and notices a mention about Acme Dash. Now, Gary's in support, so he's got a few tickets that he needs to work and close first. So he does that, and he steps through 2 tickets and decides, you know what? I've got some free time. I'm going to hop back on Twitter. I'm kind of curious what that mention was and see if anybody's responding to it. So he goes and he looks, and sure enough, there are a few more mentions about Acme Dash. And he can tell, I don't know if you can read that there, but he can see that there are people saying, I'm having trouble logging in. Is Acme Dash down? I can't log in. What's going on? So people were starting to see and notice and socially complain about a problem with Acme Dash. So at 4:16, Gary turns around. He can't see anybody in the engineering team, but he sees Kathy online. He sees her on Slack, and he reaches out to her. She's one of our top engineers. She's fairly new, but she's a great teammate, always willing to help. And so he asked Kathy, hey, can you take a look at what's going on here? If I'm seeing people sort of, say a few things on Twitter, and maybe we need to look into this. So Kathy does, and she verifies, first of all, by going to Acme Dash, that she can't get to the login page either. So with this new knowledge, they go ahead and file a ticket within their internal ticketing system to sort of keep tabs on this and update management on what's going on. And then within a minute later, Kathy is digging in, trying to find documentation, trying to find runbooks, trying to find anything that tells her where to start. Where do I go? If I can't log into the system, what's the first step? And she spends a considerable amount of time just trying to dig up this documentation. Like I said, she's new. She's an awesome engineer, but it doesn't matter how good you are, there's still information you can't have in your own head. We've got to have that stuff documented. So she's looking for that information. Finally, a few minutes later, she locates something that tells her how she can get into the system. And so she fumbled around for a little bit, but finally she was able to log into the affected server by 4:26. Notice this is 23 minutes after Gary initially noticed something on Twitter. Now, at 4:28, just like any good sysadmin, any good engineer who's trying to dig into a problem, you go, once you log in, let's run top. Let's just see what processes are running. See if we can find or spot a rogue application, a rogue process that we don't think should be doing what it's doing. And sure enough, she sees something up there that's running at 92.3%. Now, again, she's not super familiar with the overall architecture of the system, all of the processes, all of the things that are running, but she does have a hunch that this doesn't feel right. This seems like a clue here. But she hesitates on killing it. She doesn't go in and just kill that process thinking that that's going to solve everything solve everything for her. What she does then is she attempts to reach out to another person on her team, Greg, who is a much more senior engineer on the team. He's one of the original architects. He definitely knows a lot more about the system. So at 4:29, she reaches out to Greg, again via Slack, and asks if he can help kind of dig into this. Now, she didn't realize it, but at the time, but Greg took the day off. It's his daughter's birthday. He and his wife were at home trying to plan for their party that night. And so, there's a little bit of miscommunication there that he's actually taking the day off and not really able to help. But Kathy's still looking for him. She looks through her phone, through her contacts on her phone. She's still, like I said, pretty new to the company, so she doesn't have contact information for him. She then starts looking through inboxes to see if she can find something, and she finds, his phone number in like a footer of his email somewhere from, a couple weeks ago or something. So she finally gets his phone number, and then at 4:32 she gets him on the phone and says, "Hey, we got a problem. Can you help us out?" And so. This is at 4:32. This all started off at 4:03. Now we're at 4:37. Another 5 minutes have passed here. And the reason being, like I said, he has taken the day off. So he needed to kind of stop what he was doing, go find his computers, get his laptop out, and then within 5 minutes or so, he was back online, letting the rest of the team know that he's going to take a look and see what he can find out. And he asked Kathy, "Can you update the status page for us? We need to let other stakeholders know we are aware of the problem. We're taking a look at it. We're going to update you along the way." Now, Kathy is not really sure how to update the status page. She's never done this before. That's not something that they used at their previous company. So she reached out to her friend in support, Gary, who says, "Yeah, I'm happy to help. Give me a second." And so together, they get the status page updated to let everybody know. So by 4:40, they've got that updated. And they're also starting to notice that on Twitter, there are even more mentions of problems. And they've also received 10 support requests. So at this point, not only are customers noticing and complaining online, they have started submitting tickets and sending in emails to support. So people are starting to catch on that something's not quite right. So at this point, it's great that they've got the status page up. They can direct either customers or management or anybody that really wants to know, they can direct them to that page and say, our login's down, but it seems like the API is working at the moment. And then at 4:41, Greg, who was at home with his family, preparing for a birthday party, he jumps in and says that he's solved the problem. And that the system should be restoring now, or services should be coming up, and that she should be able to log in. Can you verify this? Can you go to acme-.com and see if you can get in? So 4:42, Kathy is able to log in. She can confirm that indeed the login page is up and running. Everything seems to be good. They go ahead and they update the status page, and Gary closes the ticket. So now we're at 4:42. Now, what we have to understand here is that there is a life cycle to every incident, including what happens after the fact. So what we just sort of went through is sort of seeing how did we detect this. First of all, we didn't detect this. Our customers noticed this first. But there's this phase within a problem that we call the detection phase. And then there's the response phase. And this is when Kathy was like, "Okay, I'm aware of this problem. I'm going to see if I can figure it out. I'm going to dive into some documentation. I'm going to log into some servers. I'm going to kick some resources. I'm going to do something. I'm going to understand what's happening. And then I'm going to start doing something to right this ship. I'm going to fix this problem." That's in our remediation phase. And those are the kind of the three main phases. And then we have to move on into the next phase, which, unless you're doing a root cause analysis, unless you're doing some sort of post-incident review, most people never make it into this phase. They just sort of go back to the job that they were doing, pick up where they left off. You don't always make time to do this analysis, but it's actually in this analysis, when we start digging through the rubble, there's all kinds of data points that we can use to start informing improvements into the system. We just have to take the time to sit down and discuss it, and sit down and discuss it in a way that actually looks at the system in a more holistic way, in a more systems thinking way that, again, like I said earlier, includes the people part. But this is the analysis phase. And then that analysis phase, like I said, is what informs us into how we can improve the system in lots of different areas. And that gets us into this readiness phase. So those are kind of the 5 phases of incident management. Now, if we step back and we kind of go back into the analysis phase, and we look at sort of the overall shape of the 3 different distinct phases within the actual incident as it's being worked. We've got the detection phase, the response phase, and the remediation phase. And we can go into each of these in a lot more detail. And I want to take a second here, and because I think sometimes when I'm talking on this particular presentation, I get going real fast. I got a lot of stuff I'm trying to get in. We're going to go over now sort of all of the stuff that happened. But when you sit down, if you take this advice, if you take the things that you're learning throughout yesterday and today, and you want to go back and try to do these post-incident reviews in sort of a different way, there's lots of different approaches to it. And I'm not going to tell you exactly how you should do these. More, I'm hoping to just get through why you should be doing these. Because there's lots of different approaches on how you can be performing these things. But at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is learn. So you got to get people together and say, we are just here to learn more about the system and take that learning and make it actionable and put it into our systems as not just something that goes to the bottom of the backlog, but something that we're going to implement, and we're going to implement it very soon. Because until we do, we're at risk of having these same problems. So there's going to be some sort of time where you're actually discussing that. And I have to kind of breeze over that a little bit in this presentation. But let's pretend we had that discussion. And what we would do during that discussion is, first of all, we'd notice that during our detection phase, that whole thing took 15 minutes. My first instinct is 15 minutes, okay, I don't necessarily know what the overall impact was or the cost was, but I have a feeling that we could probably at least trim a minute off of that. Is there something we can do to shave time just in the detection phase? Well, there definitely is, and if we start just kind of discussing some of the obvious things, some of the obvious observations, seems like you can read that. One of the first things is that we didn't detect this on our own. That seems like a huge problem to me. So we need to put some monitoring in place. We got to put something there that tells us before our customers that something's not right. That seems like low-hanging fruit. The next thing that's obvious for the detection phase is we didn't really have a clear path on how we're supposed to respond to these. It just so happens that somebody from support noticed it, and then he just happened to be a little bit more friendlier with Kathy than somebody else and noticed that she was on Slack, so he just reached out to her. That's not necessarily a very clear path on who's supposed to be doing what when this type of thing comes up. So for me, that's two obvious ones. We don't have to dig in very far to find two very impactful things that could help for our incident response efforts moving forward. Then if we take a look at sort of the response phase, the next phase, that took 9 minutes. And if you look at some of the things that happened, the obvious observations within here is, first of all, it's not common knowledge on how you're supposed to connect to all the systems whenever there's a problem. So Kathy had a little bit of fumbles, a little bit of kind of time ticking away that shouldn't have, just trying to figure out, what am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? Who do I reach out to if I'm in trouble? All that kind of stuff. There's definitely a million ways that you can improve that experience. So the access to the systems for that first responder was a little bit clumsy and confusing. Maybe somebody like Gary or Greg, who's been with the company a lot longer, they already have that stuff in their mind, but not everybody will. And we aren't sure who's responsible for updating the stakeholders or updating that status page. So that's something else, too, that there was a little bit of sort of disconnect on who's supposed to do that and how do you do that. So those are kind of obvious observations as well. And then we get into the remediation phase. Now, before I zoom into this, I want to point out a couple of the red things up here. So when I visualize an incident, when I look through the whole timeline and create that shape, I always look for areas where somebody did something, and we'll just call it a task. But somebody did something that actually provided either neutral or negative value to the overall efforts of driving that incident down. So you can kind of think of it as like a burn down chart. And there were two things that happened in there that provided actually kind of stepping us back. One is she didn't have contact information, and then she spent too much time kind of like looking through her phone and then looking through her email while the clock was still ticking and the company's losing money. So just wanted to point those out. It's always good to sort of visualize this stuff because you can see those are things that somebody did that actually did not help. And you want to see if you can look for areas to sort of remove those types of things. So if we look into the obvious findings here, first of all, we did have a yet-to-be-identified process that we need to sort of dig into a little bit later. We don't need to understand it while we're trying to remediate, but we want to find out what does that process, because at the end of the day, that's what Gary ended up doing. He just killed that process, and then things started to recover. Some of you might say, well, there's your root cause, but again, what was that process tied to? What other things does it interact with? Maybe it's touching something else over here. If it were me, I wouldn't kill that because it might kill something over here, and that touches 5 other things. So there's more investigating that we need to do to understand what that one process was, and maybe that's where some more technical discussion gets involved. But at the end of the day, that's when something we had to like dig in just a little bit further. And then pulling in other team members was difficult. We had some of the conversations were happening in Slack, some of them were happening over the phone. In many cases, things go over on just a basic instant message or on email. But if we don't have really like kind of very clear channels on how we're supposed to deal with that, that can definitely delay the remediation as well. And there's a couple other obvious things that we can look at too that I'm going to skip ahead just for the sake of time. Now, if we look at all of this, this took 23 minutes. The reason why that's important is that the mean time to recover is the easiest way to sort of understand your cost of downtime. There's a really great formula that's found in the State of DevOps report from 2016, how you can actually calculate your cost of downtime. And it requires you understanding or having some notion of what your average time to recover is. So if we kind of start to wrap this up here a little bit, some of the things that just in this 38-minute outage, which are very obvious, that would make our system much more resilient, much more stable moving forward is simple stuff. First of all, we need some better monitoring. We can't be okay with our customers knowing that we're having a problem before we know that we're having a problem. The next one is that we need to create some kind of way to like get people involved whenever something's going wrong. We don't even know like who was on call. Was there anybody who was even on call? Maybe they don't do that kind of stuff. Runbooks. Everybody has runbooks. Not everybody updates runbooks. We got to make sure that those things actually contain useful information because in those high-pressure situations, they're kind of something that can make a big difference. We need to make sure that the people who are responding to the systems, that they can actually do something. There's nothing more frustrating than getting paged and then actually knowing where you're supposed to go, but you don't have access into those systems. There's nothing you can do. Your hands are tied. And then someone from customer support, they decided in this situation, they should be the ones who actually update the status page. They have sort of the closest front-facing relationship with a lot of the stakeholders. So let's put them in charge of updating the status page. And then also, we don't really have very good escalation paths. So we went out and grabbed somebody who took the day off to spend it with his family. That shouldn't have been the case. We need to be able to be a lot more humane about our on-call practices and let people enjoy their time off. Let them rest. Don't let them get burnt out. Now, all of this is really just the idea of continuous improvement, which at the end of the day is what most of us are searching for anyway. In fact, in many cases, when I see people's eyes glaze over as I start to explain DevOps to them, I just say, you know what, forget it. It's just continuous improvement, and that's usually enough to kind of get them pointed in the right direction. We're just kind of trying to continuously improve the people, the processes, and the technology throughout everything that we do. Oh, by the way, that's the link to the book. If you're interested in downloading that, it's free. I'd love to hear your feedback on that. But this continuous improvement is going to lead us to all these action items. And here's sort of the catch. And I've got just a few seconds here before we're done. These action items typically just get memorialized into some sort of artifact, in some sort of document. Here's the things that we thought we were going to do, everyone. And then you don't do them. They just go to the bottom of a backlog. They sit there with all your technical debt. Nobody prioritizes them. And then we start to see these same problems over and over again. So these things have to be prioritized with feature work. And that's something you have to sit down with the product owners and have a heart-to-heart and tell them that one of your biggest features is your availability. Nobody cares about the next awesome feature or the next awesome whatever you're going to put out on your system if it's constantly falling over, if it's not available, if it's not reliable. So you got to move those action items into something that actually gets done. And then, of course, we want to summarize this into some kind of report because people want to know. They want to know not necessarily what the cause was, but that you are looking for ways to improve. Your customer's going to want to know that. Maybe you put some sort of public-facing review out there or analysis out there, but also something you circulate internally with the whole company and with definitely management to say, here's what we know, here's what we're doing to improve. And all of this is really, again, sort of that idea of just being more ready, being more prepared, being less reactionary and more proactive. And to me, that's really the whole goal of all of this, is that we can't sort of sit on our ways and say, the way we've done it is fine. We don't need to look for improvements. That's actually not true. This whole DevOps movement, it's actually trying to hammer in all of our heads that we have to break out of that paradigm. We have to start realizing that no matter what you think is the right way today, it's going to be different tomorrow. There's some other way to do it. Maybe not technically or actually tomorrow, but in the very near future, there's another new way to do it, and we have to constantly be looking for that new way that's better and more appropriate for us in our organization. That's all I've got time for. I appreciate you guys having me out here today and being a part of this conference. And I'm not sure if we have time for questions, but I'll be around and we can do open spaces and I'll chat with you at lunch and that kind of thing. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Hello? Okay, there we go. Thanks so much, Jason. Why not one question? Anyone want to come up, ask a question of Jason here? Well, thanks, Jason. I think we can all take the opportunity to consider how we do post-incident reviews in our organization and how we're learning from mistakes we make. Getting better at exercises like that is super important. And did anyone notice that Jason's example did not include anything super technical, right? It wasn't what process was killed. It was about the people in the process. And those processes are where we have the opportunity to learn and build more resilient systems. Now I'd like to welcome one of our sponsors. Byron at Round Tower is going to be sharing with us what he does at Round Tower. Please welcome him.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm Byron Schaller at Round Tower. I run our DevOps practice for as big as that sounds. So what we do consulting around processes and tooling and all that fun stuff for most of the folks here. So I want to tell you a quick story about something that we did recently that I thought was cool. So we had a client that had a bunch of data scientists, like a couple hundred, that were all doing some cool stuff in R and Python to do some hard mathy stuff, and they wanted to make them be able to run custom containers on a really large compute cluster to run these crazy math stuffs. Problem was they didn't really want to know how to do Docker things. They are math people. On top of that, there's compliance and governance and all kinds of stuff. So there were hundreds of packages that they could choose from, and all did these weird combinations, but not the thousands that were out there. So we use ServiceNow and Artifactory and TeamCity and a bunch of tools to string together this custom, self-service portal for the devs to spin up these custom containers on demand. And so we didn't have to have hundreds of containers sitting around doing nothing as far as the images go, and give them the ability to do their job in a cool, neat way that was not possible before. So we do stuff like that. We solve problems. We help people with business challenges, with tech. We're also hiring all the time. If you'd like to help people, come talk to me. And thanks. Enjoy the show. Oh, this is Luke from AppDynamics.
Hey, guys. So I spent a lot of years going to conferences and trying to avoid vendor sessions, so I'll be quick. I'm Luke with AppDynamics. I basically want to say thanks to Jason for both teeing me up really well for this, as well as kind of stealing a little bit of the thunder. So I apologize if this is a little bit of reiteration, but hopefully it just helps drive the point home. So we at AppDynamics, we're a monitoring solution. I'll talk a little bit more about what we do, but I want to talk about a little bit of like what I view from a DevOps perspective, the key pillars of having a monitoring solution that's helping to facilitate the goals of a DevOps organization. So, I mean, for the most part, the key driver for DevOps is accelerating release velocity, moving faster, failing fast, and basically with that, there are a lot of drivers for that, but you also, with it comes a lot of risk, and you need good monitoring to help mitigate that risk and help you to succeed. So the key pillars, as far as my experience has gone in talking to a lot of customers, are to have a monitoring solution that adapts quickly, so you don't have to go and, as you're making changes, quickly releasing, changing code all the time, adding new components to your infrastructure, you've got intelligence baked into your monitoring solution that you don't have to spend tons of time configuring your solution every time you're making code changes. So you got out-of-the-box detection and intelligence for everything that gets picked up as you roll out changes. The next is being able to quantify the impact of those changes. So I made a change. Did it make things better? Did it make things worse? How is it impacting my response time? And using that data to help you optimize, give you a feedback loop, and optimize all your performance. The next is to be able to, and we talked about this in this last presentation, make you proactive instead of reactive. If you're doing releases and making changes all the time, if you're going to fail fast, you want to fail fast by your monitoring solution letting you know that there's a problem before your customers are calling. And you also need to be able to quickly drill down into your mean time to resolution, identification, and so forth. And finally, it's to be able to quantify how are my changes impacting the business. So as technologists, we regularly get focused on KPIs and the next hot technology. But at the end of the day, we all have jobs to basically serve some business purpose. So being able to help bridge the impact, all right, I'm making these changes and it's impacting the business in this way. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, but you need to have that information at your fingertips. So didn't really talk much about App Dynamics, but if you want to hear more about how we help you be successful in accomplishing those challenges and fixing those problems, come back. We got a booth over there. Thanks.
Thanks, Luke. Big hand for Round Tower and App Dynamics. Some of you may have noticed we have boxes over by the silver sponsors on the bar back there. And the idea of those boxes is to take the piece of paper that's right next to them and write feedback for the presenters on how you thought they did, or just something from your perspective. It's really not about whether or not they did well or good or bad. It's about your perspective and what you can share that somebody presenting might have not had the opportunity to see. So it's not about how well they did, it's about what you can share. Please take a moment during lunch, which we're almost to leave feedback for our awesome presenters. Many of them have traveled from all around the country to be here. And guess what? What time it is? It's lunchtime, that's right, even a little early. So let's go get some food. We'll be back here at 1 p.m. Thanks, everyone.